Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've debated for months whether to share this. I'm not the type to believe in monsters or make up stories for attention. I'm a practical person who's spent most of my life hiking and camping throughout the Pacific Northwest. But what happened to me last June in the Cascade Mountains has completely changed my perspective on what might be out there in the wilderness. It was late June 2023, and I had a week off work. The weather forecast looked perfect, mid-70s and clear skies. I decided to take my dogs, Rex, my 95-pound pit bull, and Sadie, my shepherd husky mix, on a multi-day backpacking trip. We'd done plenty of overnight hikes before, but I wanted to push deeper into the wilderness this time. I chose the Miners Creek area, near the Seattle River in Washington, a remote section that required real commitment to reach. The isolation was exactly what I was looking for. The hike-in was challenging but beautiful. It took us 2 full days of hiking to reach the spot I had in mind. Rex and Sadie were in their element, running ahead on the trail and exploring the underbrush. They're both experienced trail dogs and have always been my protection in the wilderness. Rex especially has never shown fear of anything. Not bears, not strange noises, nothing. By late afternoon on the second day, we reached a perfect campsite near a small creek with a line of massive fir trees creating a natural windbreak. It was far enough from the main trail that I knew we wouldn't see anyone else. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and got a nice campfire going. The dogs roamed freely around camp as I fished in the nearby creek and managed to catch a couple of decent-sized trout. As the sun started setting, I cooked the fish over the fire and fed the dogs their dinner. It was one of those perfect wilderness evenings. No sounds of civilization, just the crackling fire, the distant gurgle of the creek, and the occasional calls of birds settling in for the night. I let the fire die down to embers around 9 p.m. and crawled into my tent, exhausted from the hike. The dogs were still outside, but I wasn't worried. They always sleep either in the tent with me or just outside, and they wake me if anything approaches. I don't know exactly what time it was when I jolted awake. It was pitch black, and the first thing that struck me was the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. In the wilderness, silence like that is unnatural and usually means something is wrong. Before I could even reach for my headlamp, I heard frantic scratching at the tent door. When I unzipped it, both Rex and Sadie practically dove inside, crowding against me. They were trembling violently. I've had these dogs for years, taken them on countless wilderness trips, and I had never seen either of them behave like this. Rex was whining, a sound I'd never heard from him before. His ears were flat against his head, and he kept pressing himself against me like he was trying to hide. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. My dogs have confronted bears before without showing this level of fear. Whatever was out there had them absolutely terrified. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight. I always bring protection when I'm camping in remote areas, not because I want to use it, but because I understand the wilderness isn't a theme park. I pulled on my boots and jacket and stepped outside the tent. The fire had died completely, leaving just a faint red glow among the ashes. The night was moonless and exceptionally dark. I swept my flashlight around the campsite, seeing nothing unusual at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. You know that sensation when you can feel eyes on you? It was overwhelming. I tried to calm myself by rebuilding the fire. As I knelt down and started arranging kindling, I heard it. Heavy footsteps in the trees behind our campsite. Not the light steps of a deer or even the deliberate walk of a bear. These were heavy, bipedal footsteps that made the ground seem to vibrate slightly. And then came the smell. I've encountered plenty of wild animals and their scents before, but this was different. It was like a skunk mixed with rotting meat and something musky I can't even describe. The odor was so strong it made my eyes water. I abandoned the fire and stood up, pointing my light toward the sound. The beam only penetrated about 30 feet into the darkness, illuminating the trunks of the massive firs and the underbrush. I saw nothing, but the footsteps stopped as soon as my light moved in that direction. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No response, just that unnerving silence. I backed toward the tent, keeping my light and rifle pointed toward where I'd heard the footsteps. The dogs were still inside, whimpering. Rex, who would normally be at my side confronting any threat, refused to leave the tent. I crawled back inside and zipped the door shut, knowing full well how meaningless that thin barrier would be against anything that really wanted to get in. I sat there in the dark with my rifle across my lap, dogs pressed against me, listening. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then I heard movement again, this time from a different direction. Whatever it was had circled around to another side of our camp. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like it was trying to be quiet, but was too heavy to move silently. Branches snapped under its weight. I turned on my headlamp and shined it through the tent wall in the direction of the sound. The light created a dim glow through the fabric, and for just a second, I saw a massive shadow move across the tent wall. Not a bare shadow. This was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, and moved in a way that was eerily human-like but not quite right. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I clutched my rifle tighter, trying to control my breathing. The dogs sensed my fear and pressed closer, trembling against me. For the next several hours, the creature circled our campsite. Sometimes it would stop and just stand there. I could sense its presence even when I couldn't hear it moving. Other times, it would shuffle around, breaking twigs and rustling bushes. Occasionally, it would make a sound that I can only describe as a deep, rumbling breath. Not quite a growl, but something that vibrated at a frequency that made the hair on my arms stand up. I kept checking my watch. Time seemed to crawl. 1:37 a.m., 2:22 a.m., 3:45 a.m. I was determined to stay awake and alert, but the adrenaline and fear were exhausting. Around 4:30 a.m., when the first hint of pre-dawn light began to appear, the creature seemed to retreat further into the woods. The oppressive feeling of being watched eased slightly, though it didn't disappear completely. By 5:15 a.m., there was enough light to see outside. I cautiously unzipped the tent and peered out. The campsite looked undisturbed, no footprints, no signs of anything having approached the tent. But at the edge of the clearing where the forest began, several branches were broken at a height of about 8 feet off the ground, fresh breaks with sap still oozing. I didn't bother with breakfast or coffee. I packed up as quickly as I could, constantly scanning the tree line. The dogs stayed unnaturally close to me, their eyes darting nervously at every sound. Rex, who normally bounded ahead on trails, now refused to be more than a few feet from me. By 6 a.m., we were on the trail heading back. I had originally planned to stay 2 more nights, but there was no way I was spending another minute at that campsite. About 20 minutes into our hike out, I heard it again. Heavy footsteps paralleling our path through the forest, always staying about 75 yards away. The creature was following us. For nearly the entire day, as we hiked the long miles back toward civilization, it kept pace with us. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses through the trees, never a clear view, just a large, dark shape moving among the trunks and underbrush. Always keeping its distance, but clearly following. The dogs knew it was there too. Sadie kept looking toward the sounds, whining softly. Rex, normally fearless, stayed so close he was practically walking between my legs, making hiking difficult. We stopped only twice, briefly for water and a quick bite of food. Each time the sound stopped too, and I could feel it watching us from the forest. That horrible smell would drift across on the breeze, making it clear it wasn't far away. As we got closer to more frequently traveled trails around mid-afternoon, the presence finally began to fade. The footsteps grew more distant, then stopped altogether. It was as if the creature had escorted us out of its territory, and once satisfied we were leaving, had turned back. By the time we reached my truck in the parking lot, the dogs had begun to relax slightly, though they were exhausted from the pace I'd maintained all day. I was physically and emotionally drained, my hands shaking as I loaded our gear. I've spent the month since then trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a bear, though I've encountered bears before, and this felt completely different. The way it moved, the height of those broken branches, the bipedal gait. I keep coming back to one conclusion that my rational mind wants to reject. What followed us that day was what native stories call Sasquatch and others call Bigfoot. I've never been one to believe in cryptids or monsters. I've always thought Bigfoot was a myth, a story told around campfires. But now, I don't know. What I experienced was real. My dog's fear was real. Those broken branches 8 feet off the ground were real. I haven't gone back to that area since, and I'm not sure I ever will. Sometimes at night, I still wake up thinking I smell that distinctive odor, or feeling like something is watching me through my bedroom window. Rex, who used to sleep in his bed across the room, now insists on being right beside me all night. I'm still an avid hiker and camper. I still love the wilderness. But now I venture out with the knowledge that there might be things in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest that defy explanation. Things that perhaps don't want to be found or understood. And maybe that's as it should be. Story 2. I've been hunting in the Olympic Peninsula all my life, same as my dad and his dad before him. You learn a thing or two after 30 years in those woods, how to track, when to shoot, and most importantly, when something just ain't right. This happened last October. Me, my brother-in-law Dale, and 2 buddies from work, Mike and Tanner, had permits for black bear. It was our annual trip, something we'd been doing for years. Usually we'd get our bear within a day or two, field dress it, and head back to civilization with some decent meat and a good story. This time was different, way different. We'd been tracking this big male black bear for 4 days straight. Unusual for us to take that long, but the track showed he was a monster, probably 350–400 pounds based on the prints, worth the extra effort. The weather had been decent, cold but dry, typical fall in Washington. On the 4th day, we followed the tracks to this little valley with a rocky outcropping surrounded by huckleberry bushes. When we got there, I stopped dead in my tracks. The whole area looked like a tornado had hit it. "What the hell happened here?" Dale whispered next to me. Young trees, saplings maybe 3 inches thick, were snapped in half. Not cut, not chewed by beaver, just broken. Berry bushes were ripped clean out of the ground, roots and all. There was fur everywhere, black bear fur for sure, but also something else I couldn't identify. The ground was torn up, like someone had taken a rototiller to it. "Bear fight," Tanner suggested, but I shook my head. Bear fights leave distinctive marks, and this wasn't it. This was something else. Mike wandered about 20 yards away and called us over. "Guys, you gotta see this." He was holding what looked like a tree branch, except it wasn't just any branch. This thing was about 5 feet long and thick as my forearm, maybe 5 to 6 inches in diameter. It had been ripped, not cut, not broken, but literally torn, from a nearby tree. The thick end had dried blood and tufts of black fur stuck to it. "Jesus," Dale muttered. "Something used this as a club." I laughed nervously. "What, like a bear grabbed a stick and started swinging?" Nobody laughed with me, because we all knew bears don't use weapons. We kept following the bear tracks, which were now mixed with blood spatters. About half a mile further, we finally caught up to our bear. He was moving slow, obviously injured. We got into position, and I took the shot. Clean through the heart, he dropped right there. We approached cautiously. Wounded bears are dangerous bears, even with a heart shot. But he was dead. We set up to field dress him, and that's when things got weird. As Tanner started making the initial cuts to skin him, he called me over. "Rob, you ever seen anything like this?" The bear had patches of fur completely missing from his chest and stomach. Not just tufts pulled out in a fight, but entire sections, like something had grabbed handfuls and yanked them off. But it was the claw marks that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They were on his flanks and back. Wide, shallow cuts, spaced far apart. 5 marks, positioned almost like a human hand with a thumb. But the spacing was all wrong for a human, too wide. Whatever made these marks had hands bigger than mine by a significant margin. "Could be another bear," I suggested, not believing it myself. Mike, who'd been hunting these woods for 40 years, shook his head. "Bear claws leave deeper, narrower marks. These are wide and shallow, and look at the spacing." The most disturbing part was the bite marks on the bear's neck and shoulders. They weren't deep punctures like you'd expect from another bear or a cougar. They were shallower, more rounded, forming almost a horseshoe shape. Bear bites and cougar bites are narrower, more oval. "Whatever did this jumped on his back and held on while it bit him," Dale said, pointing at the pattern of injuries. "See how the claw marks are positioned. It was riding him, holding on with those hands." The weight of what he was suggesting hit us all at once. We fell silent as we continued skinning and quartering the bear. That night at camp, I couldn't shake the uneasiness. We were sitting around the fire when Mike finally said what we'd all been thinking. "My grandfather used to talk about the forest families." I knew exactly what he meant. The old-timers in this region had their own term for what most people call Sasquatch or Bigfoot. They called them forest families because they were supposedly highly social, living in family groups. "My cousin Roy saw one about 15 years back," Tanner added quietly. "Said it was about 9 feet tall. He never went hunting again." Dale scoffed. "You guys seriously think Bigfoot beat up our bear?" Mike stared into the fire. "What I think is that bear stumbled onto a berry patch where a forest family was feeding, and the male attacked to protect his mate and young. Those things don't exist," Dale insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Something used a branch as a club," I reminded him. "Something with 5 fingers that can grab." Mike nodded. "They're strong too, unbelievably strong. Could snap a bear's neck if they wanted to, but this one didn't kill the bear, just drove it off." As we finished processing the bear meat, I noticed something else strange. The bear had an unusual smell, particularly on its back, where the worst injuries were. Bears normally have this musty, wild odor. This was different, a combination of something rotting and this powerful, musky scent that reminded me of the time I got too close to a wolverine den. We packed up the next morning and headed home, all of us a little quiet, lost in our own thoughts. I kept thinking about those claw marks, 5 distinct lines like fingers. The spacing was what bothered me most. Too wide for a bear, too wide for a human. I thought that was the end of our strange encounter, but there was one more chapter to this story. About 2 months later, in December, I went back to that same general area. There was about 2 feet of snow on the ground, and I took my snowmobile to a good fishing spot about 3 miles from where we'd found the bear. The lake was frozen solid, and I spent a few hours ice fishing. When I returned to where I'd parked my snowmobile, my blood ran cold. The machine wasn't where I'd left it. It was about 50 yards down a gentle slope, tipped onto its side. Now, my Arctic cat weighs close to 500 pounds. There was no way it could have just rolled down that hill on its own. The parking brake was set, and even if it wasn't, the snow was too deep for it to slide that far. Something had pushed my snowmobile down that hill. I looked around frantically, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but I felt watched. The silence was absolute. That unnatural stillness that happens in the woods when something big is nearby. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. My hands were shaking as I righted the snowmobile. The key was still in the ignition where I'd left it. Nothing was damaged or missing. As I was about to start it up, I noticed something in the snow about 10 feet away that made my stomach drop. A single footprint. It was mostly collapsed, but I could make out the general shape, roughly 18 inches long, much wider than my boot, with what looked like 5 distinct toe impressions. I've never started a snowmobile so fast in my life. As I sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd received a message. Stay away from this area for the winter. Let the Forest family be. It's been 6 months, and I still haven't told many people this story. Those who hunt these woods regularly, they know. They've all got stories they don't share with outsiders. Tales of strange sounds in the night, of massive shadows moving through the trees, of finding structures in the deep woods that no human made. I don't know what fought that bear. I don't know what pushed my snowmobile. But I do know I'm going to pick a different hunting ground this October. Some territories aren't meant to be shared, and some warnings should be heeded. I still have that bear's hide hanging in my garage. Sometimes I find myself staring at those peculiar claw marks, 5 distinct lines spaced wide apart, trying to convince myself they were made by another bear. But deep down, I know better. Something else lives in those woods. Something that walks on 2 legs, has hands that can grab, and is strong enough to fight a full-grown black bear and win. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I swear I can still smell that strange odor on the hide. Not quite bear, not quite human, but something in between. Something that doesn't have a name in our world, but has every right to defend its territory when we intrude. I just hope I never get close enough to see one face to face. The tracks and claw marks were more than enough for me. Story 3. I've been a country girl my whole life. Me and Tom moved out to this rural property in northern Arkansas about 5 years ago. Just wanted peace and quiet, a place to raise chickens, grow our own food, a simple life away from all the noise. But what happened last fall? I still can't make sense of it. I'm writing this down, hoping someone might believe me, or maybe has experienced something similar. It all started in early October 2023. We'd been having a normal autumn up until then. The leaves were turning. We'd harvested most of our garden and were just settling in for the colder months. We have 2 small dogs, Baxter, a Jack Russell, and Penny, a Dachshund mix. They're usually pretty quiet at night, maybe a bark or 2 if a raccoon comes by, but nothing major. On October 12th, it was a full moon. I remember because the light was coming through our bedroom window so bright it almost looked like dawn. Around 1 a.m., both dogs absolutely lost their minds. This wasn't their normal barking. They were frantic, like they were terrified of something. Tom was dead asleep. He can sleep through anything, but I got up to check. I threw on my robe and stepped out onto our back porch. The moon was lighting everything up almost like daytime. Baxter and Penny were at the edge of our yard, barking like crazy toward the dirt road that runs past our property. I could hear other dogs barking too. Probably the neighbor's dogs about a quarter-mile down. That's when I noticed all the dogs seemed to be moving, following something up the road. I squinted, trying to see what had them so worked up. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer. But then I heard it, this weird rhythmic thumping sound, like heavy footsteps on the packed dirt. And then I saw it. In the middle of the road was this figure. Even now I don't know how to describe it properly. It was huge. I mean massive, walking upright on 2 legs, but it wasn't a person. No way. The silhouette was all wrong. Too bulky, too tall. The dogs were trailing behind it about 10 yards back, like they were too scared to get any closer. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move, just stood there clutching the porch railing. The figure kept walking until it reached this patch of thick woods about 50 yards from our property line. Then it stopped. What happened next still gives me nightmares. The thing squatted down and put its hands, paws, I don't know, on the ground like it was getting ready to charge. Then it suddenly sprang up and spun around to face the dogs. It spread its arms out wide. They looked impossibly long and let out this sound. God, that sound. It was like a growl and a screech combined, something between a big cat and a bird of prey, but so much louder. I gasped out loud without meaning to, just a reflexive, "Oh my God!" And the thing's head snapped in my direction. Even from that distance, I could feel it looking right at me. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it just turned and walked into the woods. Not running, not scared, just calmly walked away. The dogs came rushing back to the house, whimpering and shaking. I called them inside, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night wide awake with both dogs huddled against me on the couch. I didn't wake Tom. What would I even say? I wasn't sure what I'd seen myself. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, but deep down, I knew that wasn't right. Bears don't walk upright that far, or that naturally. And that sound, bears don't make sounds like that. 3 days later, Tom found our chicken coop had been damaged. 2 wooden beams had been ripped down, not chewed, not broken, but forcefully pulled apart. 2 of our hens had broken necks. Tom figured it was a raccoon, or maybe a fox that had gotten in, though he seemed puzzled by how they'd managed to break the wooden supports. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen. Then we started losing quail. We keep them in this big cage in our barn. It's secure, with a proper latch. Every few days, we'd go out in the morning and find the cage still closed and latched, but 1 or 2 birds missing. No signs of forced entry, no feathers, nothing, just gone. Tom installed a trail camera facing the cage, but the memory card was always blank in the morning. I was starting to get really nervous. I wasn't sleeping well, and I kept the dogs inside at night. Tom thought I was overreacting to some normal predator activity, but he didn't push it too much. Then came November 2nd. It was getting dark early by then, around 5 p.m. I went out to close up the barn for the night, something I'd done hundreds of times before. The sun was just setting, casting long shadows across our property. I'd finished locking up and was heading back to the house when I felt it. That feeling of being watched. You know that sensation on the back of your neck? I slowly turned around. There it was, standing at the edge of the tree line, about 100 feet away from me. In the fading light, I could see it clearly this time. It was enormous. I'd estimate 7.5 to 8 feet tall, bulky and powerful looking, maybe 450 pounds. It had dark brown hair covering its body, with these weird orangish tints that caught the last rays of sunlight. The hair on its face was shorter but the same color, and it was looking right at me, not just in my direction. Right at me, with intelligence behind those eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. We just stared at each other. Then our neighbor's truck backfired on the main road, and the thing took off down the steep hill behind our property. It moved so fast, taking these massive strides. Later, Tom and I measured the disturbances in the leaf litter, 6 to 7 feet between footprints. A normal person just can't stride that far, especially not downhill on uneven ground. I told Tom everything that night, about what I'd seen in October and what I'd just seen. To his credit, he didn't dismiss me outright. He's a practical man, but he knows I'm not one to make things up or get hysterical over nothing. We stayed up late, researching online. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I'd always thought those stories were nonsense, just tall tales and hoaxes. Now I wasn't so sure. The next few weeks were tense. We reinforced the chicken coop. installed more lights around the property, and Tom started keeping his rifle closer at hand. The dogs wouldn't go outside alone anymore. They'd stand at the door whining until one of us went with them. December 4th is when things escalated. I was checking my winter garden. I had some hardy greens still growing under row covers. The ground was damp from rain the night before. That's when I saw them. Footprints. 3 distinct impressions in the soft soil of an uncovered section. These weren't human footprints. They were massive. We measured them at 18 inches long and about 6 inches wide. They had 5 toes, and you could see details in them, like skin texture. They weren't paw prints either. They were feet, bare, humanoid feet, but impossibly large. Tom went to get the camera and some plaster of Paris we had in the shed to make casts. While we were working on this, something hit the ground about 10 feet away from us. A rock, about the size of a baseball. We both froze, looking around. Nothing was visible, but the woods suddenly seemed very quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Then we heard it. Banging from inside our barn, like something heavy hitting the walls. Tom grabbed his rifle and we hurried over. The banging stopped as soon as we got close. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance, but then we noticed the quail cage. The wire mesh on one side was stretched outward, like something with strong fingers had pulled on it. Another quail was missing. We didn't sleep at all that night. We sat up with the lights on, the dogs between us, jumping at every sound. Around 3 a.m., we heard it. A scream from the woods. Not human, not any animal I've ever heard. It started low and rose to this high-pitched howl that seemed to go on forever. Then silence. Tom, against my better judgment, went to the back porch and tried to mimic the sound. I thought he was crazy, but he's always been the type to face things head-on. A few minutes passed, and then we got a response. The same howl, but closer this time. Tom came back inside, and we locked every door and window. The rest of December was a nightmare. We heard the screams almost every night, sometimes far away, sometimes so close it seemed like whatever was making them was right outside our bedroom window. The chicken coop got hit again, the wire fencing torn open, and another chicken taken. We found strange broken branches high up in the trees at the edge of our property, like something large had been climbing them. We called the game warden, who came out and looked at our plaster casts. He seemed troubled, but ultimately said it was probably a bear with deformed paws. He didn't have an explanation for the sounds or the missing birds, just told us to keep our animals secure and to call if we saw anything. The activity seemed to peak around the winter solstice. After that, the incidents became less frequent, though we'd still occasionally hear those howls in the distance. By February, things had mostly quieted down, though neither of us would go outside alone after dark anymore. I don't know what was living in those woods last fall. I don't know if it's still there, just keeping its distance, or if it moved on to somewhere else. What I do know is that there are things in this world that don't fit into neat scientific categories. Things that most people will go their whole lives without encountering. Sometimes at night, I still wake up with that feeling of being watched. I'll look out the window at the tree line, dark against the sky, and wonder if it's out there. And sometimes, when Tom thinks I'm not paying attention, he'll go out on the porch and make that call into the darkness. And sometimes, something calls back. Story 4. I still don't sleep well at night. It's been almost 4 years since it happened, but I can't shake the memory of those fingers. Every time I hear a noise at a door, my heart races. I'm 20 now, but I feel like part of me will always be that terrified 16-year-old kid, frozen in fear on our living room couch. This happened in spring 2020, right when COVID was starting to get serious. School had just switched to online, and my parents both worked in healthcare, so they were busier than ever. They didn't want me staying home alone all day, so I was sent to stay with my aunt and uncle in their house outside Asheville. It's a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and nothing exciting ever happens. Or at least, that's what I thought. My aunt and uncle both worked during the day, but their son Tyler stayed home. He's 6 years older than me and was taking a gap year before college, picking up mechanic work here and there. My parents thought it would be good to have someone watching me, even though I was perfectly capable of being on my own. But whatever, at least Tyler was cool and mostly left me alone. Their house was old, like built in the 1930s old. It had this weird layout that you only find in houses that have been modified a bunch of times over decades. The strangest part was this front door in the living room that literally opened to nothing. It was about 4 feet off the ground with no porch or steps outside it. Just a drop straight to the ground. No one ever used it. Everyone came in through the back door that connected to the driveway. That unused front door was secured by the most ridiculous lock I've ever seen. Just a bent nail that you'd twist into place above the doorknob. My aunt always said they'd get around to installing a real deadbolt someday, but they never did. It wasn't a priority since nobody ever used that door. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My aunt and uncle were at work, and Tyler was outside in the driveway fixing his truck. He'd been working on it for days, constantly tinkering with the engine. I was sprawled on the couch in the living room, half paying attention to some stupid Netflix show while scrolling through my phone. The living room was pretty basic. Worn carpet, that ugly floral couch that's probably been there since the 90s, and a TV mounted on the wall. The unused front door was directly to my left, and from where I was sitting, I could see it perfectly in my peripheral vision. I remember it was around 3:30 p.m. because I was getting hungry and thinking about making a snack. That's when I first noticed the movement. It was so slight that I almost missed it, just the tiniest vibration of the door in its frame. I turned to look directly at it, thinking maybe it was just the wind. We'd had some strong gusts that day, and the house was drafty as hell. But there was something deliberate about the way the door was moving. It wasn't being buffeted by wind, it was being tested. The doorknob started to turn slowly, like someone was trying to be quiet. My first thought was that it must be Tyler. Maybe he'd locked himself out, or was playing some stupid prank. "Tyler!" I called out, expecting to hear him laugh from the other side. No answer. The doorknob kept turning back and forth. I got up and walked halfway to the door, stopping about 6 feet away. "Tyler, I know it's you. Cut it out." The movement stopped for a second, then started again. More forcefully this time. The door began to rattle slightly against the frame. That's when I felt the first real twinge of fear. If it was Tyler, he would have answered me by now. Plus, why would he try to come in through the unused door that was elevated off the ground? It didn't make any sense. I backed up a few steps, my eyes fixed on the doorknob. I could see it turning completely now, like someone had a firm grip on it from the outside, but the nail lock held firm, preventing the door from opening. "Who's there?" I said, my voice coming out higher and shakier than I intended. No response, just more rattling. The door was shaking in its frame now, like someone was pushing against it. Not violently, but with steady, increasing pressure. I felt a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. I thought about running outside to get Tyler, but that would mean taking my eyes off the door. What if whoever was out there came in while I was gone? I grabbed my phone from the couch, ready to call Tyler or 911 if things got worse. That's when I saw it. 3 long fingers slid under the gap at the bottom of the door. I froze completely. The gap was maybe half an inch high, just enough for these things to wriggle through. They weren't normal fingers. They were impossibly long and thin, like someone had stretched normal fingers to twice their length. The skin was a sickly greyish colour, and the fingernails were dark, almost black, and curved slightly like claws. But the worst part was the hair. The back of the hand was covered in coarse, dark brown hair that grew all the way to the knuckles. It wasn't like human arm hair. It was thicker, almost like animal fur, but not quite. The fingers flexed and pressed flat against the floor, like they were trying to get purchase to pull something through. They stretched in further, reaching about 6 inches into the living room. I could see the knuckles now, bulging unnaturally. Whatever was attached to those fingers was pushing hard to get more of its hand under the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, phone clutched uselessly in my hand, watching these inhuman fingers feeling around on the floor of the living room. They moved with purpose, like they were searching for something, or feeling to see if anyone was nearby. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 seconds, the fingers stopped moving. They went completely still, splayed out on the carpet. Then slowly they curled inward, as if beckoning me to come closer. That broke my paralysis. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the coffee table. I wanted to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off those fingers. They remained still for a moment, then began tapping on the floor, one at a time, like they were playing a piano. Tap, tap, tap. Then all 3 fingers flattened against the floor again and started dragging across the carpet, back and forth in small motions, like they were trying to feel vibrations. Searching, listening with their fingertips. I held my breath. I was certain that if I made the slightest sound, those fingers would know exactly where I was. The tapping resumed, more insistent this time. Tap, 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 almost like it was trying to communicate. The doorknob was still turning back and forth. Whatever was on the other side was trying both approaches simultaneously, turning the knob while reaching under. The bent nail lock was the only thing keeping the door shut, and I watched it anxiously, praying it wouldn't slip out of place. I don't know what compelled me, but I took a single step forward. Immediately, the fingers went rigid. Then they began moving more frantically, scraping against the carpet, stretching farther in, trying to reach deeper into the room. The nails scratched against the floor, making a sound like sandpaper on wood. The thing kept this up for about 3 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. I stood frozen the entire time, barely breathing, afraid that any movement would draw those fingers toward me. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the fingers withdrew. They slid back under the door, one by one, the middle finger being the last to disappear. The doorknob gave one final twist, then stopped. The door stopped shaking. I waited, counting to 60 in my head, making sure it was really gone. When nothing happened, I crept forward and looked at the bottom of the door. There were small scratches in the carpet where the fingers had been, and something else. 3 small, dark stains. I didn't touch them, but they looked like dirt or some kind of residue. I backed away from the door and finally looked at my phone. I'd been clutching it so hard my hand was cramping. It was 3:37 p.m. The entire encounter had lasted only about 7 minutes, but it had felt like hours. I wanted to call Tyler immediately, but something held me back. What would I even say? Hey, there was a monster trying to get in through the front door. He'd think I was crazy or playing a stupid prank. Instead, I sat back on the couch, as far from the door as possible, and kept my eyes fixed on it, waiting for any sign of movement. Nothing happened. The door remained still. Outside, I could hear Tyler still working on his truck, the metallic clangs and occasional curses floating through the windows. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. I sat like that for the next 45 minutes, barely moving, barely breathing, just watching the door. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just an animal. But what animal has fingers like that? Maybe it was someone playing a prank. But how would they have reached the elevated door, and why would they have those things on their hands? At around 4:20, I heard the back door open and Tyler's heavy boots in the kitchen. "You want a soda?" he called out. I couldn't find my voice at first. Then I managed to croak out, "Yeah, sure." He came into the living room, tossed me a Coke and flopped down in the armchair. He was covered in grease and sweat, looking exhausted from working on the truck. "You okay?" he asked, giving me a weird look. "You're white as a sheet." I hesitated, then asked, "Were you trying to come in through the front door earlier?" He frowned. "What? No. Nobody uses that door. Why would I climb up there when the back door's right by the driveway? Did you see anyone around the house while you were working outside? Tyler shook his head. Nah, I was under the truck most of the time. Why? What's going on? I couldn't tell him. The words wouldn't come out. He'd think I was making it up or that I'd fallen asleep and had a nightmare. Instead, I just said nothing. Thought I heard something, that's all. He shrugged and turned on the TV, immediately absorbed in some car restoration show. I sat there, sipping my Coke, trying to act normal, while my mind replayed those fingers sliding under the door over and over. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door before going to sleep. I kept waking up, thinking I heard tapping sounds outside my window. Tap, 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 tap. But when I looked, there was nothing there. I never told anyone the full story until now. My aunt and uncle sold that house about a year later, and I was more relieved than they could know. I still visit them in their new place sometimes, but I've never been able to look at an unused door the same way again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. Maybe the isolation of COVID lockdown was getting to me. Maybe I dozed off watching TV and had a vivid dream. But then I remember those fingers, too long, too wrong, and the way they moved with intelligence and purpose. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that tapping sound in my dreams. Tap, tap, tap. Like something is still trying to get my attention, like it's still looking for a way in. Story 5. I still can't believe what happened that day during our training exercise at Fort Stewart. This was back in August 2010, when I was a squad leader with the 3rd Infantry Division. I've been in the Army for over a decade, deployed twice to Iraq, seen some pretty messed up stuff, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what we encountered in those Georgia woods. It was hot as hell, typical August in Georgia, the kind of humidity that makes your uniform stick to you within minutes of stepping outside. We were taking part in a massive division-wide training exercise, basically war games where half the units play Op-4, opposing forces, and the other half try to complete objectives while avoiding getting killed. My squad had been tasked with a reconnaissance mission, moving through about 12 clicks of dense forest to locate an enemy command post. We'd been moving for about 4 hours, taking it slow and quiet like we were trained. The forest was thick, lots of pine, oak, and this dense underbrush that was a pain in the ass to move through quietly. My radio man Wilson was behind me, then Sanchez, Martinez, Jackson, and Rodriguez bringing up the rear. Standard formation, nothing unusual. It was around 17:30 hours when things started getting weird. First, the forest just went quiet. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know they're never actually silent. There's always birds, insects, something making noise, but suddenly nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing and boots on the ground. I remember thinking it was strange, but didn't say anything. I figured maybe there was another squad nearby that had spooked the wildlife. We kept moving for another 15 minutes before we heard it, this low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I immediately signaled the squad to stop and take a knee. We all froze, weapons at the ready position. I thought maybe it was a bear, though something about the sound didn't feel right. It was deeper, more, I don't know, deliberate somehow. After about 30 seconds of silence, there was this sharp, high-pitched scream that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't human, wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was almost like a cross between a woman screaming and an elk bugling, but way more intense. "What the fuck was that?" Wilson whispered next to me. I just shook my head, motioning for everyone to maintain noise discipline. That's when we saw movement from the southern woodline, maybe 250 feet away from our position. Through the trees, I could make out what I initially thought was someone crouching. My first thought was Op-4. Maybe a scout team had found us and was trying to set up an ambush. Following protocol, I stood up partially and called out, "Identify yourself. This is Echo Company, 1st Battalion." No response, just more rustling in the brush. I called out again, "Identify or we will engage." Standard procedure, even in training. That's when we heard the growl again, but louder this time, clearly coming from whatever was moving in the brush, and then... Jesus, I still get chills thinking about it. The figure stood up. It wasn't a person, not even close. This thing was massive. I'd estimate between 7 and 8 feet tall. It had a broad, powerful build, covered in what looked like dark brown or black hair. Not fur, but hair, like a human's, but all over its body. The face... I couldn't make out details at that distance, but it wasn't human. The proportions were all wrong. A pronounced brow ridge, no real neck to speak of, just this massive head sitting on huge shoulders. For a few seconds, nobody moved. My guys were frozen, and so was I. I'd like to say I maintained my composure as a leader, but the truth is, I was terrified. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This thing, whatever it was, just stood there, swaying slightly, staring right at us. "Sarge," Martinez whispered from behind me, his voice shaking. "What the Quiet," I hissed, not taking my eyes off the creature. "Everyone back up slowly. Don't run." We started to ease backward, keeping our weapons pointed in the direction of the creature, but not directly at it. I don't know why, but something told me not to make any threatening movements. The thing watched us, its head tilting slightly as we moved. That's when it let out another of those screams, so loud it felt like it pierced right through me, and bent down to the ground. When it straightened up again, it had something in its hand. Before I could process what was happening, the object came hurling through the air toward us, hitting a tree about 10 feet to our right with a heavy thunk. It was a fucking rock. A big one, maybe the size of a football. This thing had just thrown a rock at us with enough force to embed bark into the tree. "Move!" I ordered, abandoning the slow retreat. We started backing away more quickly, still facing the creature. It picked up another rock. This time I could clearly see it ripping it from the ground, roots and dirt flying, and hurled it. This one sailed over our heads, but not by much. What happened next is still hard for me to believe, even though I saw it with my own eyes. The creature suddenly dropped to all fours and started running, not lumbering or shuffling like you'd expect from something that size, but full-on sprinting through the woods. Its movement was fluid, powerful, covering about 300 feet in what seemed like seconds before disappearing into the thicker part of the forest. The speed. That's what gets me the most when I think back. Nothing that big should be able to move that fast. Nothing. "What the fuck was that?" Rodriguez kept repeating, his voice higher than normal. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "But we need to get moving." We changed our route, heading northwest instead of due north as originally planned. I radioed command to report unusual wildlife activity. I couldn't bring myself to say what we'd actually seen, and requested permission to alter our course. They approved without question, probably thinking we'd spotted a bear or something. As darkness fell, we set up a defensive position with our backs to a small creek. Standard procedure was to maintain 50% security, meaning half the squad sleeps while the other half keeps watch. That night, nobody slept. We sat in a tight circle, eyes scanning the tree line, jumping at every sound. And there were plenty of sounds. Throughout the night, we heard movement in the woods around us. Branches breaking, that same low growling, and occasionally those high-pitched screams, sometimes from different directions. It was like we were being watched by multiple sets of eyes, circled by creatures that were staying just out of sight. Around 0200 hours, Martinez swore he saw eyes reflecting our small tactical light from the brush, 2 sets of eyes, much higher off the ground than a deer or coyote would be. At 0330, we all heard something large moving through the creek about 100 meters downstream. The splashing wasn't like a deer carefully picking its way across. It was heavy, deliberate. By the time dawn finally broke, we were exhausted, strung out on adrenaline and fear. The woods were quiet again. Normal forest sounds had returned, birds chirping, squirrels rustling in the trees. Whatever had been stalking us through the night seemed to have moved on. We completed our mission, linked up with the rest of the platoon at the rally point, but I never reported what we'd actually seen. What would I say? That my squad encountered Bigfoot during a training exercise? That we were stalked through the night by what appeared to be a family of Sasquatches? Nobody would believe it, and I wasn't about to risk my career or my soldiers' reputations. The 5 of us made a pact not to talk about it outside the squad, but we know what we saw. To this day, I can close my eyes and see that figure standing up, towering over the underbrush. I can hear that scream that didn't belong to any known animal. 2 months later, I was deployed to Afghanistan, and my squad was split up among different units. We never really talked about it again, even among ourselves. It was like this unspoken thing. We'd experienced something impossible, something that didn't fit into our understanding of the world, and acknowledging it somehow made it more real than we could handle. I left the army in 2015, moved to Colorado to get as far from the Georgia woods as possible. I still hike, still spend time outdoors, but never alone, and never in heavily forested areas. I tell people it's because I got used to having battle buddies in the military, but the truth is I'm afraid of what might be watching from the trees. The strangest part? A few weeks after the incident, I got curious and started researching local legends. Turns out Fort Stewart and the surrounding areas have had numerous reports of unusual wildlife encounters over the years. Most are written off as bears or wild boars, but there are enough similarities to what we experienced to make me wonder how many other soldiers have encountered these things and, like us, chose to stay quiet. Sometimes I wonder if the military knows. If these massive training areas like Fort Stewart, Fort Polk, and other bases with huge wooded areas are home to creatures that most people think are just myths, is that why some areas are designated as off-limits, even during major exercises? Is that why certain sectors of the base are permanently restricted? I don't know what we saw that day. I'm not saying it was definitely a Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever you want to call it. All I know is that it wasn't human, wasn't any known animal, and moved with an intelligence and purpose that still haunts me. Whatever it was aware of us, assessed us as a threat, tried to scare us off, and then followed us through the night. Not blindly attacking, but watching, evaluating. That's what keeps me up at night sometimes. Not just that these creatures might exist, but that they're smart, maybe as smart as us in their own way, and they're out there in the woods of Georgia and probably elsewhere, living their lives largely undetected, except for these brief, terrifying encounters. I've never told this story publicly before. Even now, I'm not using my real name. My ex-wife knows. It came out during a bad fight when she accused me of being paranoid about camping trips. But I don't think she believed me. Thought it was PTSD or something. But I know what I saw. Jackson, Martinez, Wilson, Sanchez and I, we all saw it. We all heard it. And somewhere out there in the woods of Fort Stewart, those creatures are still roaming. Sometimes I wonder if they remember us too. Story 6. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, 10 years later, and I can't drive that stretch of Highway 6 without my heart racing and my eyes darting to every shadow along the roadside. What I saw that night in 2012 shouldn't exist according to science, but I know what I saw. I just moved back to Washington after spending 5 years in Arizona. The transition from desert heat to the damp Pacific Northwest was rough, especially that winter. We'd had this brutal cold snap, temperatures dropping into the teens for almost 2 weeks, followed by 7 straight days of that relentless Washington rain that seems to seep into everything. That night, I was driving back from visiting my brother in Raymond. It was around 11:30 p.m., pitch black except for my headlights. The roads were empty, and I'll admit I was going too fast, probably 65 in a 50 zone. I knew those roads well enough, or at least I thought I did. I'd grown up hunting these woods with my dad, knew every trail and creek from Chehalis to Pale. I remember everything about that moment with this weird clarity. I was about 27 miles up Highway 6, just past Doty, tiny little place, blink and you miss it. The road there gets really winding, lots of blind curves with dense forest pressing in on both sides. My high beams were cutting through this light mist, hanging in the air, making everything look slightly unreal. I came around this sharp bend and suddenly there was something in my lane. My brain didn't process what I was seeing at first. I hit the brakes hard, the tires skidding a bit on the wet asphalt. My truck fishtailed slightly before gripping the road again. As I got closer, still braking, I realized it was something alive, lying face down in the middle of the lane. My first thought was maybe a deer hit by another car. But no, the proportions were all wrong. This thing was massive, easily the size of a very large man, but bulkier. I slowed to maybe 15 mph, close enough now that my headlights illuminated it completely. What I saw still makes me question my sanity sometimes. It was covered in hair, jet black, soaking wet hair, hanging in these 4 to 6 inch strands all over its body. The hair was matted from the rain, sticking to whatever this thing was. And it was big. Not bear big. Different big. Then it moved. It raised its head and looked directly at me. I'll never forget that moment. Our eyes meeting across the beams of my headlights. Its face. Jesus! The hair hung down over its eyes, but I could see them reflecting my headlights. Its face wasn't human, but wasn't exactly animal either. The nose was flattened, almost like a chimp's, and its mouth, all I can say is, it reminded me of a gorilla or something similar. But not quite. I swerved around it at the last second, nearly clipping it with my passenger side mirror. As I passed, I got a better look at its body. The arms were massive, way longer than human proportions, and its legs were thick and powerful looking. I've hunted these woods my entire life. I know every animal native to southwest Washington. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't have that body structure, and a bear on all fours looks nothing like what I saw. This thing had a torso like a man, but larger, more powerful. When it looked at me, it raised up on its forearms, almost like it was doing a push-up. I hit the gas hard after passing it and checked my rearview mirror. I swear it sat up completely as I drove away, watching my taillights disappear around the next curve. I pulled over about a half-mile down the road, hands shaking so bad I could barely put the truck in park. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I'm not some Sasquatch hunter or paranormal nut. I'm a practical guy, worked construction for 22 years. I believe in what I can see and touch, and what I saw was real. After sitting there for maybe 5 minutes, heart pounding like crazy, I made the stupidest decision of my life. I turned around. I had to know if what I saw was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I drove slowly back to that curve, my truck's headlights sweeping across the empty road. Nothing. It was gone. I stopped exactly where I'd seen it lying. The pavement was wet from the rain, but there was no other sign anything had been there. I got out of my truck, grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, and shined it into the woods on both sides of the road. The beam barely penetrated the dense undergrowth. The forest was eerily quiet. No animals, not even the usual chorus of frogs or insects. That's when I noticed something on the pavement. Right where the creature had been lying was a darker patch. At first I thought it might be oil from a previous vehicle, but when I crouched down to look closer, I realized it was water, not rainwater. The rest of the road was already starting to dry in patches. This was a distinct outline, roughly the size and shape of a large body, as if something wet had been lying there moments before. Standing there alone on that dark road, flashlight in hand, I felt exposed, vulnerable. The forest suddenly seemed to be watching me. I swept the flashlight beam toward the tree line again and caught a glimpse of something moving about 20 yards into the woods. Just a flash of that same wet black hair disappearing behind a massive cedar. I didn't stick around to investigate further. I practically jumped back into my truck, locked the doors, and got the hell out of there, driving well over the speed limit all the way home. What bothers me most, even now, is trying to understand why it was lying face down in the middle of the road. It wasn't dead or injured. It moved too quickly for that. We'd just come out of that brutal cold snap, and with all the rain, I've wondered if maybe it was drinking water off the pavement. Or maybe it was sick. Could these things get sick? Do they suffer in extreme weather like we do? I've gone back to that spot several times since then, but always during daylight. I've looked for tracks, hair, anything that might confirm what I saw. Never found a thing. The forest there is thick with underbrush, salal, ferns and blackberry vines that would quickly erase any trail. I've told a few people, close friends, my brother, but most just give me that look. You know the one. The sure, buddy, whatever you say, look. My brother actually believed me. He said his friend's father had seen something similar near Skookumchuck in the 70s. I didn't report it to authorities. What would I say? Hey, I saw Bigfoot taking a nap on Highway 6. They'd have me take a breathalyzer test faster than I could blink. There were no news reports about unusual animal sightings in the area. No one else came forward with a similar story. Just me, alone with what I saw. I've spent countless hours researching since then. Read everything I could find about Sasquatch sightings in the Pacific Northwest. Some accounts match details of what I saw, the jet black hair, the size, the vaguely human-like features. But nothing explains why one would be lying in the middle of a highway on a rainy night. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was more tired than I realized after the drive from my brother's place. But then I remember the water outline on the pavement, the flash of movement in the woods, the way my skin crawled when our eyes met. The logical part of my brain still fights with what I know I saw. I'm a hunter. I know animals. I know the woods. And I know with absolute certainty that what I encountered that night wasn't something science has properly classified. Last fall, I was hunting elk about 5 miles from that same spot on Highway 6. I was alone, sitting in my blind before dawn. As the first hint of light filtered through the trees, I heard something moving through the underbrush about 100 yards away. Not an elk, not a deer. The footfalls were too heavy, too deliberate. Whatever it was walked on 2 legs, not 4. I didn't see anything that morning, but I felt watched. I packed up early and left the woods before noon. I don't hunt alone anymore, and I never drive that stretch of Highway 6 at night if I can help it. If I have to, my eyes are constantly scanning the road ahead, and I keep my speed well below the limit, especially around that curve near Doty. Whatever I saw that rainy night in 2012 is still out there. I'm sure of it. And sometimes in my dreams, I don't swerve in time. In those nightmares, I stop my truck, and the creature stands up, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, and approaches my driver's side window. I always wake up before I see what happens next. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I know what I saw, and I know that whatever it was, it saw me too. Sometimes I think that's the most terrifying part, the recognition I saw in those eyes. This wasn't just an animal. There was an intelligence there. Something that recognized me as clearly as I recognized it was something that shouldn't exist. The woods of Washington State are vast and ancient. Most of it has never felt human footsteps. We think we know what's out there, but we don't, not really. There are places in those forests where the shadows seem deeper, where the silence feels heavy with secrets. And sometimes, on rainy nights when the boundary between their world and ours seems thinnest, those secrets spill out onto roads where unsuspecting people like me are forced to face them. I still drive through Doty occasionally. The town hasn't changed, still just a handful of houses and that one little store. But the woods around it feel different to me now, like they're hiding something, or protecting something. I keep a dash cam in my truck these days, just in case. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, get proof this time. But a bigger part hopes I never round that curve and find something waiting for me in the middle of the road. Because next time, it might not just lie there and watch me drive by. Story 7. I still remember the day I realized we weren't alone on our property. It's been years now, but the memory still makes the hairs on my neck stand up. I guess I should start by saying we live in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, on this piece of land that backs right up to state game lands. It's beautiful out here, peaceful, lots of trees, wildlife, the works. At least, that's what I thought. My son Max was 7 at the time, just a normal kid who loved being outside, digging in the dirt, collecting bugs, typical boy stuff. He had this thing about collecting clay from fallen tree stumps near our property line. He'd fill up his little red bucket and bring it back to make these little clay figures. I thought it was great, kept him busy and creative, you know. This particular day was in early October. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold. Max had gone out with his bucket like usual while I was inside fixing a leaky faucet. Couldn't have been gone more than 20 minutes when I heard the back door slam so hard it rattled the windows. Then came Max's footsteps, not walking but running full speed through the house. "Dad! Dad!" His voice was high-pitched, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. I dropped my wrench and ran to the kitchen where he stood, white as a sheet, breathing so hard I thought he might pass out. His little red bucket was gone. "Whoa, buddy, what's wrong?" I asked, kneeling down to his level. "There's a monster in the woods," he said, his eyes wide and serious. "By the big rocks. It was watching me." Kids and their imaginations, right? I figured he'd seen a deer or maybe a black bear, which sometimes wander through. "What kind of monster?" I asked, trying to humor him. "Really tall, really tall, and dark. It was standing behind the boulder field, just looking at me." Something about the way he described it sent a chill through me, but I did what any rational dad would do. I assured him there were no monsters, but I'd go check it out just to be sure. I walked out to where Max had been playing, near the fallen tree stumps about 50 yards from our house. His little red bucket was there, tipped over, clay scattered around like he'd dropped it in a hurry. I looked toward the boulder field that marked the edge of our property, a jumble of massive rocks left over from the last ice age. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just rocks, trees, the usual forest stuff. I almost turned back when something made me stop. The boulder field sits about 8 feet lower than the rest of the property. If something was standing behind those rocks, only the top portion would be visible from where Max was playing. For something to appear really tall from that position, it would have to be, 9 or 10 feet at minimum? The thought made my stomach tighten. I scanned the tree line again, more carefully this time, but saw nothing. Just the usual Pennsylvania woods. I picked up Max's bucket, gathered the scattered clay and headed back to the house, trying to shake off the uneasiness. I told Max it was probably just a deer or maybe his imagination, but deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. Life went on normally for a few years after that. Max eventually stopped talking about what he'd seen. I mostly forgot about it too, chalking it up to a kid's overactive imagination, until Pepper started acting strange. Pepper was our German shepherd, smart, protective, absolutely fearless. This dog would chase bears away from our trash cans and face down coyotes without hesitation. She loved patrolling our fenced backyard at night, keeping watch over her territory. It started last fall. One night, I opened the back door like usual for Pepper's evening patrol. Instead of bolting out like she always did, she stopped dead at the threshold. Her ears were flat against her head, and she was making this low growl I'd never heard before. "What's wrong, girl? Go on out," I urged her, thinking maybe she was just being stubborn. Pepper took 2 hesitant steps onto the deck, then froze again. Her whole body was rigid, her tail tucked between her legs. Something was seriously wrong. I stepped out beside her, and that's when I noticed the silence. If you've ever lived in a rural area, you know nights are never truly quiet. There's always something: crickets chirping, frogs croaking, the distant hoot of an owl. But that night, there was nothing. Absolute silence. Like someone had hit the mute button on the entire forest. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the feeling before a massive thunderstorm, but worse. I'd never experienced anything like it. Even the normal ambient sounds seemed swallowed up by whatever was out there. Pepper whined and pressed against my leg, something she'd never done before. This 85-pound fearless dog was terrified of something I couldn't see. "Fine, just do your business and we'll go back in," I told her, trying to sound normal despite the knot forming in my stomach. She practically sprinted to the nearest patch of grass, peed faster than I'd ever seen, then bolted back to the door, scratching frantically to be let in. Once inside, she didn't settle on her bed like usual, but ran straight upstairs and crawled under the covers on my son's bed. She wouldn't come out for hours. This became our new normal every night for weeks. Pepper would refuse to go outside after dark. When forced, she'd do her business as quickly as possible before racing back inside. Sometimes she'd stand at the door and bark at nothing we could see, her hackles raised, that same low growl in her throat. My wife Melissa started noticing it too. "What's wrong with Pepper?" she'd ask. "She's never been afraid of anything before." I didn't have an answer. I just knew something had changed in our peaceful little corner of Pennsylvania. Then came the night that I can't explain away, no matter how hard I try. It was a Saturday in late November. Melissa and I had been at a friend's house for dinner and got home around 10:30 p.m. As we pulled into our long driveway, the headlights swept across our garage and trash cans, which were at the end of the drive waiting for Monday's pickup. I saw movement by the trash cans. At first, I thought it was raccoons. We get them occasionally. But as we got closer, I realized it was something much bigger. "What is that?" Melissa asked, leaning forward in her seat. I slowed the car, keeping the headlights trained on the area. As we crept forward, whatever it was moved from behind the trash cans toward the side of the garage. It wasn't running exactly, but moving with this weird, fluid motion that I can only describe as cat-like. But it wasn't a cat. Not even close. In the few seconds it was illuminated by our headlights, I saw enough to know this was something I'd never encountered before. It was maybe 3 to 4 feet tall, with a cinnamon-colored body covered in wispy hair about 4-6 inches long. The hair wasn't thick like a bear's, but sparse enough that I could see skin underneath. Its legs moved all wrong, almost like a jaguar's, with this eerie flexibility that no human could mimic. "Derek, what the hell is that?" Melissa's voice had risen an octave. The thing disappeared into the shadows beside our garage before I could answer. I stopped the car in the middle of the driveway, about 30 feet from where I'd seen it. "Stay here," I told Melissa, ignoring her protests as I grabbed my phone for the flashlight. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots. The silence hit me immediately, that same unnatural quiet from before. No insects, no wind, nothing. I switched on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the area where the creature had been. Nothing there. I moved toward the side of the garage, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The beam of light revealed nothing but empty space next to the garage. Whatever I'd seen was gone. But how? There was about 60 feet of open lawn between the garage and the tree line. Nothing could have crossed that distance in the few seconds it took me to get out of the car, not without me seeing it. I walked the entire perimeter of the garage, then expanded out to the edge of the woods. No tracks, no disturbance in the grass or soil, nothing to indicate anything had been there at all, except for one of our trash cans tipped over, its contents scattered. When I got back to the car, Melissa was white-knuckle gripping the dashboard. "What was it?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's gone now." We went inside, locked every door and window, and checked on Max, who was sound asleep. Pepper was hiding under his bed, trembling. She wouldn't come out, not even for her favorite treats. That night, neither of us slept. We kept hearing noises outside, not the normal forest sounds, but subtle movements. Branches cracking, something brushing against the side of the house. Once, I could have sworn I heard breathing outside our bedroom window on the second floor. The next morning, I searched the property again in daylight. Still no tracks, no evidence of whatever we'd seen. But as I walked the tree line at the back of our property, near the boulder field where Max had his encounter years before, I found something that made my blood run cold. A series of broken branches about 8 feet up, too high for a human or a bear to reach without climbing. And on one of the tree trunks, embedded in the bark, was a clump of cinnamon-colored hair. I didn't take it. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want proof. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd discover if I looked too closely. I just backed away and went inside. We never directly discussed what to call what we'd seen. We just referred to it as that thing by the trash cans. But I knew what Melissa was thinking, because I was thinking it too. The height when standing upright, the weird movement, the hair, the way it vanished impossible fast. It all pointed to something I'd dismissed as legend my entire life. A month later, I was splitting firewood near dusk when I felt it again, that heavy, watching presence. I looked up toward the boulder field just in time to see something dark move behind the rocks, something large, something that shouldn't exist. I dropped the axe and went inside. I didn't tell Melissa or Max what I'd seen. What would be the point? We all know something's out there. Something that's been watching us, maybe for years. Something that knows our routines, our weaknesses, our fears. We still live in the same house. Max is 14 now and doesn't play by the boulder field anymore. Pepper still refuses to go outside alone after dark. Sometimes, when I'm up late and the house is quiet, I'll hear wood knocking from the direction of the state game lands. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. I never answer. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe I just need someone else to know. Maybe I'm hoping someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not crazy. All I know is that we're not alone on our property, and whatever shares it with us has been watching for a very long time. Last week, I found Max's old red bucket, the one he dropped all those years ago, placed neatly on our back porch. It wasn't there when I went to bed. The security cameras didn't catch anything, but inside the bucket was fresh clay, still damp, as if someone had just collected it from the fallen tree stumps. Story 8. For those who don't know me, my name is Marcus. I worked as a night security guard at the Riverdale Industrial Complex just outside of town, surrounded by about 40 acres of dense forest on 3 sides. It wasn't much, just 5 warehouses and a small office building where I was stationed. The pay was decent and the job was simple: monitor the security cameras, do hourly patrols, and make sure nobody was breaking in to steal the electronics and manufacturing equipment stored there. The best part was that I could bring Shu, my German shepherd, with me. He was my buddy, my partner. I named him after Michael Schumacher, the Formula One driver. Shu was incredibly smart and disciplined, perfect for a security dog. He'd been with me since he was 8 weeks old, and at 4 years old, he was in his prime. We had a routine down pat. I'd arrive at 10 p.m., do my first walkthrough with Shu by my side, then settle in the office where I'd watch the monitors while Shu napped nearby. Every 2 hours, we'd do another patrol. It was boring most nights, but I didn't mind. I'd listen to podcasts or audiobooks while keeping an eye on things. Everything changed on a Thursday night in late October. The weather had turned cold earlier than usual, and there was this weird fog hanging low in the valley where the complex sat. I remember pulling up to the gate and feeling uneasy for no apparent reason. Shu was restless in the back seat, whining a little, which wasn't like him at all. "What's up, buddy?" I asked him, reaching back to give him a scratch. He just looked at me with those intelligent eyes of his, and I swear he was trying to tell me something. The first patrol that night was normal. The warehouses were quiet, just the usual hum of climate control systems and security lights casting long shadows. But when we reached the northeastern perimeter, Shu froze. His ears went up, his body tensed, and he let out a low growl that made my skin crawl. That's when I saw it. A deer carcass about 15 feet from the chain-link fence. Now, finding dead animals isn't super uncommon out here, but this was different. This deer had been mutilated is the only word I can use. Its back legs were completely gone, and the way the body had been torn apart didn't look like the work of normal predators. There was barely any blood around it, which seemed impossible given the damage. I radioed into my supervisor, but he just told me to note it in my report and that they'd call wildlife services in the morning. I took a few pictures on my phone, trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. Shu wouldn't go near it. He kept his distance, hackles raised, whining softly. The rest of that night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The image of that deer stayed with me, and I found myself checking the cameras more frequently, scanning the tree line visible in the exterior shots. The next couple of nights were quiet, almost too quiet. The wildlife that usually made noise in the surrounding forest, owls, coyotes, the occasional fox, seemed to have gone silent. I mentioned it to the day guard when I arrived on Sunday, but he just laughed and said I was getting spooked by nothing. "Probably just a bear that took down that deer," he said as he gathered his things to leave. "They've been more active this year with the drought affecting their food supply." Maybe he was right. I tried to convince myself it was just a bear as I settled in for my shift. But Shu wasn't convinced. He was on edge from the moment we arrived, pacing around the office instead of settling down in his usual spot. Around 1 a.m., he suddenly bolted upright and ran to the door, barking frantically. I checked the monitors, but didn't see anything unusual. "What is it, boy?" I asked, getting up to look out the window. The parking lot was empty, the perimeter fence intact. But Shu wouldn't stop barking, those deep, urgent barks that told me something was definitely wrong. That's when I heard it, heavy footsteps on the roof above me. At first I thought it might be raccoons or maybe a fallen branch, but these were distinct, heavy footsteps. Thump, 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 moving slowly across the metal roof of the office building. Whatever was making those sounds had to be heavy, really heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, then hesitated. Protocol said I should investigate any unusual activity, but everything in me was screaming to stay put. Shu was still barking, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as the footsteps continued. "Security base to dispatch," I said into my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm hearing unusual sounds on the roof of the main office, requesting backup." Static was the only response. I tried again, but nothing. The radio was dead, which made no sense, because I'd checked it at the beginning of my shift. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. There was a moment of complete silence, and then a loud, scraping sound like something huge was dragging itself across the metal roofing. Shu went berserk, jumping at the door, desperate to get out. I had to check. That's my job, right? I grabbed the taser we were issued, no firearms allowed on the property, and unlocked the door, keeping Shu on his leash. The night air hit me like a wall, unnaturally cold, and carrying a smell I can only describe as rotten meat, mixed with wet fur. The exterior lights illuminated the parking lot and part of the loading area, but the spaces between buildings were still dark. I swept my flashlight across the area, seeing nothing unusual at first. Then I aimed it upward, toward the roof. Nothing was there. No sign of whatever had made those footsteps. "Come on, Shu," I said, tugging gently on his leash. "Let's check the perimeter." We did a slow circuit around the office building. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching nothing but the usual nighttime shadows. But the feeling of being watched was so intense I could barely breathe. Shu felt it too. He kept looking around, muscles tense, ready to spring. We had just rounded the corner to the back of the building when we heard a loud crash from the direction of Warehouse 3. It sounded like breaking glass. Shu jerked so hard on his leash that it slipped from my hand, and before I could call him back, he was sprinting toward the sound, disappearing into the darkness between the warehouses. "Shu, come back!" I shouted, running after him. My flashlight bounced wildly as I ran, the beam cutting erratic patterns through the darkness. I could hear Shu barking, not his alert bark, but his aggressive, threatening bark that he used when he perceived a real danger. I rounded the corner of Warehouse 3 and skidded to a stop. One of the high windows had been shattered, glass glittering on the asphalt below. Shu was nowhere in sight, but I could hear him barking from the direction of the tree line that marked the edge of the property. Fear gripped me like a physical force. Something was very wrong here. I should call for backup, wait for help. But Shu was out there, and he was my responsibility. I followed the sound of his barking, my flashlight beam sweeping ahead of me. The fence separating the complex from the forest loomed in the darkness. Shu's barks had turned to frantic snarls, and then I heard something else, a deep, rumbling growl that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. My light caught Shu's reflective collar. He was at the fence, facing the woods, his body rigid with aggression. "Shu!" I called. "Come here, boy!" He didn't even acknowledge me. His attention was completely focused on something in the trees. I swept my flashlight in that direction, but saw nothing at first. Then, just as I was about to call Shu again, my light caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me from about 7 feet off the ground. Red eyes, not the yellow-green reflection you'd expect from a bear or coyote. Blood red and huge, set wide apart in what I could only make out as a massive, shadowy form. For a second, we were all frozen. Me, Shu, and whatever that thing was in the trees. Then it moved. Fast. Faster than something that size should be able to move. A massive arm, I can only describe it as an arm, not a paw or a limb, shot out from between the trees. It reached through a gap in the fence and grabbed Shu. God, it happened so fast. 1 second he was barking, the next he was yanked against the fence with such force that I heard, Jesus! I heard his bones crack. Shu let out a yelp of pain that turned into a gurgle, and then he went limp. The creature pulled him through the gap in the fence, like he weighed nothing at all. I think I screamed, I'm not sure. All I know is that I turned and ran, blind panic taking over. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I sprinted back toward the office building. I could hear movement behind me, heavy, fast movement crashing through the underbrush, then the sound of the fence rattling as if something large had climbed over it. I didn't look back. I just ran, my lungs burning, adrenaline pumping through my system. The office was maybe 200 yards away. I could make it. I had to make it. I was halfway there when something hit me from behind with such force that I was knocked completely off my feet. I hit the ground hard, the air pushed from my lungs. My flashlight went flying, landing several feet away with the beam pointing uselessly at the sky. Whatever hit me was on top of me now. It was heavy, so heavy I could barely breathe under its weight. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck, smell that awful stench of rot and musk. I tried to crawl away, but a hand, yes, a hand, not a paw, grabbed the back of my jacket and flipped me over like I was a doll. And then I saw it, illuminated dimly by the distant security lights and my flashlight's stray beam. It looked like... God, I don't even know how to describe it. Like an ape, but bigger. Much bigger. It was covered in thick, reddish-brown hair. Its shoulders were massive, easily twice the width of mine. But its face was the worst part. It wasn't fully animal. It had features that were almost human. A flattened nose, a heavy brow, a mouthful of teeth that looked too much like ours, and those eyes, red, glowing eyes that seemed to look straight through me. I should have fought harder, I should have done something, but I was paralyzed with fear, pinned under this creature that shouldn't exist. It leaned in closer, those eyes boring into mine, and I swear it was studying me, curious about me. In that moment, I stopped struggling. Some primal part of my brain took over, telling me that fighting would only make it worse. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then it made a sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that vibrated through my entire body. Not a growl, something else, almost like it was trying to communicate. The moment broke when headlights swept across the parking lot, the midnight delivery truck arriving earlier than usual. The creature's head snapped up, then it looked back down at me. With one fluid motion, it grabbed me by my jacket and threw me. I sailed through the air and slammed into the trunk of a tree at the edge of the parking lot. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. I heard more than felt my back break, a sickening crack that echoed in my ears. Then everything went dark. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. They told me I'd been found by the delivery driver, unconscious and badly injured at the base of a tree. My spine was fractured in 2 places. My right arm was broken, along with 4 ribs. I had a severe concussion and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. The official report says I was attacked by a bear. That's what the police decided, what the wildlife authorities confirmed. A rogue black bear, they said, probably the same one that killed my dog. They found parts of Shu's body in the woods, torn apart like that deer had been. I didn't argue with them. How could I? Who would believe me if I told them what I really saw? They'd think I was delirious from the pain or traumatized from the attack, and maybe they'd be right. Maybe my mind manufactured something impossible because the truth was too ordinary to match the horror I felt. But I know what I saw. I know what attacked me wasn't a bear. The eyes, the hands, the way it studied me. No bear does that. The physical recovery has been slow. I'm walking again, barely, with a cane. The doctors say I'm lucky the spinal damage wasn't worse. The nightmares are harder to deal with. Every night I see those red eyes staring into mine. I feel that weight on my chest. I hear Shu's bones breaking. I've been researching since I got out of the hospital, reading accounts from others who've seen similar things in the forests of Ohio, Pennsylvania, across the whole eastern seaboard, really. Most people laugh these stories off. I used to be one of them. Not anymore. I don't know what to call what attacked me. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, wood booger. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it exists, and it's not the gentle forest giant from the beef jerky commercials. It's powerful, intelligent, and dangerous. I'm moving away from here as soon as I'm well enough. Somewhere flat and open, with no forests nearby. I can't be near the trees anymore, can't shake the feeling that something is watching me from just beyond the edge of the woods, waiting for me to let my guard down again. And every night I apologize to Shu for not protecting him better, for not believing his warnings. He knew something was wrong from the very beginning, and I didn't listen until it was too late. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself 3 months ago. But I needed to write this down, to tell someone what really happened that night. The authorities have closed the case. The industrial complex has a new night guard. Life has moved on for everyone except me. Because I know they're out there, these creatures we pretend don't exist. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still smell that distinctive musk, like something is lingering just out of sight, watching me through my bedroom window with those glowing red eyes. Story 9. I've been carrying this with me for 25 years, never told a soul about it until now. Not my parents, not my wife, not even my closest friends. I guess I didn't want people thinking I was crazy or looking for attention, and honestly, part of me wanted to keep it private, like it was something special just for me. But I'm 40 now, and I still think about it all the time. I need to get this off my chest. This happened back in 73 or 74. I was 15, living in McCain County, Pennsylvania, small town near Bradford, right in the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains. Growing up there in the 60s and 70s was different than now. No internet, no cell phones. Kids actually went outside, you know, and I was outside constantly. My grandfather had worked for Kendall Oil Company and helped build these lease roads and trails all through the hills for the oil wells. I knew those hills like the back of my hand. Had a little Honda dirt bike that I rode everywhere. It was freedom for a kid my age. My parents would just say, "Be home by dark," and I'd disappear into those woods for hours. There was this one particular ridge I liked to go to. It ran for maybe 3-4 miles with these awesome views on both sides. About 1.5 miles along this ridge, there was this great blackberry patch that would be loaded with berries in late summer. I'd ride up there, fill up whatever container I brought, and my mom would make pies. But there was something weird about that hill. A few years earlier, maybe when I was 12, my buddy Tim and I rode up there and heard this, I don't even know how to describe it, this screeching sound, not like an animal I'd ever heard before. It was almost human, but not quite. We both got completely freaked out and tore out of there on our bikes like the devil himself was chasing us. Tim refused to ever go back up there. I eventually started going back alone, though. Never heard the sound again, so I figured maybe it was just some weird bird or something, but I always had this feeling when I was up there, like I was being watched. Anyway, it was late August, probably 73. Hot as hell. I decided to ride up to get some blackberries. I remember it was a Wednesday because my dad was working a night shift and my mum was at her sister's house helping with some project. No one even knew exactly where I'd gone. I rode my bike up there around noon. The trail was dry and dusty, and I remember the tall grass along the ridge was starting to turn that golden color it gets before fall. The blackberry patch was right where the ridge opened up to this little clearing. I parked my bike and started picking berries. I had a little plastic butter container that I was filling up. The berries were perfect that day, huge and juicy. I got absolutely lost in picking them, moving deeper into the patch. Must have been at it for at least an hour. I was sweating like crazy, and my fingers were all purple from the juice. Eventually, some bees started getting too interested in me and the berries, so I decided to take a break. There was this pipeline clearing that cut perpendicular across the ridge, maybe 100 yards from the berry patch. It was basically a wide path where they'd cleared all the trees for gas lines, creating this perfect corridor through the woods. It was a great place to spot deer and other wildlife since you could see a good distance down the hill. So I walked over there, thinking I might see something. I was standing at the top of this pipeline clearing, looking downhill. The sun was high overhead, making everything bright. The pipeline stretched maybe 300 yards down before disappearing into a curve. About halfway down, maybe 50 yards from me, I noticed something moving near a fallen log. At first I thought it was a bear. We had plenty of black bears in those woods, and they'd often dig into old logs looking for grubs and insects. All I could see was what looked like a black bear's rear end sticking up from behind this big log. The log was maybe 3 feet high, and this bear was bent over doing something on the other side of it. I just stood there watching it. I wasn't particularly scared. I'd seen plenty of bears before, and they usually run away if they notice you. I was actually excited to see one. I stayed perfectly still, hoping to watch it for a while, and then it sensed me somehow. I don't know if it heard me breathing or caught my scent on the breeze, but whatever it was, it suddenly stopped what it was doing. And then it stood up, and it kept standing up. It wasn't a bear. This thing stood on 2 legs and turned slightly toward me. It must have been 7 feet tall. It was covered in dark fur, not black like I first thought, but more of a deep brown, almost like a chocolate-colored bear. But it wasn't a bear at all. It had this massive, broad chest and shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. The arms were long, way longer than a human's, hanging down past its knees. The head sat directly on the shoulders, like it didn't really have much of a neck. And the face, Jesus, the face. I couldn't make out details at that distance, but it wasn't a bear's face. It was flat and more, I don't know, humanoid, I guess. We just stared at each other. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was like time stopped. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, but nothing made sense. This wasn't anything I recognized. It wasn't anything that should exist. I don't know how long we stood like that. Probably only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. Then I accidentally dropped the container of blackberries I was still holding. It hit the ground with a plastic clatter, and berries spilled everywhere. That broke the spell. The creature turned fully away from me and started walking, not running, across the pipeline clearing toward the woods on the other side. That's when I noticed something that still sticks with me. The way it moved. It wasn't clumsy or lumbering like you'd expect from something that big. It was graceful, efficient, each step deliberate and smooth. It crossed the clearing in maybe 10 strides and disappeared into the tree line on the other side. Once it was gone, panic hit me like a truck. I ran back to my bike, fumbling with the kickstart. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get it started. When the engine finally caught, I tore out of there, riding faster than was safe on those trails. I nearly wiped out twice on the way down. But here's the weird part. After I'd gone about half a mile, I stopped. Something in me wanted to go back, not all the way to where I saw it, but just to check if it was real, to see if there was any evidence. I was terrified, but also curious. Like I needed to confirm I wasn't crazy. So I turned around and rode back up, but much slower this time, engine barely above idle, so I could listen for anything unusual. I stopped at the edge of the pipeline clearing, leaving my bike there. My legs felt like rubber as I walked carefully to where I'd seen the creature. The log was still there, of course. I could see where something had been digging in it. Chunks of rotten wood were scattered around. On the far side of the pipeline, where the thing had entered the woods, there was a small trail leading into the darkness. I stood at the edge of that trail, staring into the shadows. The forest there was different, darker, more dense. The path looked perpetually muddy, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. Something about it felt wrong, like it was a place I shouldn't go, like if I stepped onto that path, I might never come back. I realize now, looking back, that I never thought to look for tracks, which is crazy because I was an experienced hunter even at that age. My dad had taught me to track since I was little, but in that moment, it just never occurred to me to look down. My focus was entirely on that dark path leading into the woods and the feeling that something might still be in there watching me. The silence was what finally drove me away. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just absolute stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran to my bike. I rode home and didn't look back. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I'd lay awake replaying that moment when it stood up, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I thought about telling my dad, but I knew how it would sound. In a small town like ours, word would get around fast, and I'd be that crazy kid who saw Bigfoot. So I kept quiet. I never went back to that spot. I rode my bike on other trails, but never that ridge again. Sometimes when I was in the woods, I'd get that feeling again, like I was being watched. I'd scan the tree line, half expecting to see it standing there, but I never did. As the years passed, the memory never faded. While other childhood experiences grew dim and distant, this one stayed crystal clear. I can still see every detail of that thing standing up and turning toward me. The way the sunlight hit its fur, the absolute shock of realizing what I was looking at. I moved away after high school, went to college in Pittsburgh. Whenever I'd come home to visit, I'd look up at those hills and wonder if it was still up there, if anyone else had seen it. I never heard any local stories about sightings, which was strange for a rural area. Usually, if something like that is around, hunters or hikers report something eventually. I think that's part of why I kept it to myself for so long. It felt special somehow, like I'd been shown something not meant for everyone to see, and honestly, part of me was protective of it. Whatever I saw that day, it wasn't aggressive. It could have charged at me, but it didn't. It just walked away. It was like a very human animal, something that deserved to be left alone, not hunted down or turned into a spectacle. I'm still not sure what to call what I saw. Sasquatch? Bigfoot? Those names seem too cartoonish for what was a profound, life-changing moment. Whatever it was real. It was there on that hill in McCain County in the summer of '73, digging through a log while a 15-year-old kid picked blackberries nearby. And for all I know, it's still there. Story 10. I still have a hard time talking about what my husband Robert and I saw that night. It's been 3 months now, but every time I close my eyes I can still see it standing there in our headlights, looking right at us. I've tried telling a few friends, but the looks they give me, well, you can imagine. So I'm posting here because at least some of you might believe me. It happened back in February. Robert and I live in Magalia, California, up in Butte County. For those who don't know the area, we're surrounded by forest and mountains, about 10 miles north of Paradise. Yes, the town that burned in 2018. We've lived here for nearly 15 years and thought we'd seen all the local wildlife, bears, mountain lions, deer, you name it. That night, we were driving back from visiting Robert's brother in Sterling City. It was around 10:30 p.m., and there was no moon. I remember because Robert had commented on how dark it was when we left his brother's place. The only light came from our headlights cutting through the darkness as we wound our way along the curves of Skyway Road. For anyone not familiar, this stretch of road between Paradise and Sterling City twists through dense forest. Pine trees tower on both sides, and there are deep canyons in parts. It's beautiful during the day, but at night, it feels like driving through a tunnel of darkness. The road was completely empty. We hadn't passed another car in at least 20 minutes. Robert was driving our old Ford Explorer. The heater was blasting because it was freezing outside, probably in the low 30s. We weren't really talking, just listening to some old Eagles song on the radio. I remember I was half dozing, my head against the window, watching the trees flash by in our headlights. We came around this long curve. I think it's about 3 miles past Inskip, for locals who might know the area. The road straightens out a bit there before curving again. That's when Robert suddenly slammed on the brakes. "What the hell is that?" he said. The car skidded a little, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to snap me fully awake. At first, I thought maybe a deer had jumped out, which is common enough around here, but what I saw standing at the edge of our headlights wasn't a deer. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. My first impression, and this sounds crazy, I know, was that it was a man in a fur coat crossing the road. That's honestly what my brain tried to tell me for a split second, because what else could it be, right? But then it turned toward our car, and I knew immediately this wasn't human. It was tall, taller than any man I've ever seen. Robert is 6'2", and this thing had at least half a foot on him, maybe more. It was completely covered in hair, short black hair that looked almost slick in our headlights. The hair wasn't matted like you'd expect on a bear. It looked more like a uniform covering. And there were these, I don't know if they were white spots or specks of mud or what, but they stood out against the black. Its face is what I remember most vividly. It was lighter colored, almost white compared to the dark body. I couldn't make out detailed features because of the darkness and the distance, but I remember thinking how wrong the proportions seemed. The head had this weird shape, almost like it came to a peak at the top. And the cranium, the top part of the head, seemed way too small for how massive the body was. And the eyes. God, the eyes. They didn't reflect our headlights like a deer's or bear's would. They just absorbed the light somehow. Dark pits that seemed to be looking right through us. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. It was standing there, turned to look at us, and then it just moved. I can't even say it ran or walked. One moment it was there in our headlights, and the next it had vanished into the trees on the other side of the road. No sound, no warning, nothing. Robert had hit the brakes so hard we were both jolted forward against our seatbelts. The car came to a complete stop right where the thing had been crossing. We sat there in silence for I don't know how long, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes. It's hard to recall exactly. The headlights illuminated the empty road and the dense wall of trees beyond. "Did you see that?" Robert finally whispered. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I nodded, unable to speak at first. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "What was it?" I managed to ask. "I don't know," he said. "It wasn't a bear. That much was certain. I've seen plenty of bears in our years living up here. This was something else entirely. The way it stood upright, the proportions of its body, the way it moved, none of it matched any animal I know." Robert rolled down his window and we both listened. The forest was completely silent. No rustling, no breaking branches, nothing to indicate where the creature had gone. Just the soft idling of our engine and our own breathing. "Should we look for it?" I asked, though honestly, the last thing I wanted was to get out of the car. "Hell no," Robert said. He rolled his window back up and put the car in drive. "Let's get out of here." We drove the rest of the way home in silence. I kept scanning the trees along the roadside, half expecting to see the thing again, but there was nothing. When we pulled into our driveway, Robert turned to me. "We should report this, right?" he asked. "To, I don't know, the rangers or something?" I hesitated. "And tell them what? That we saw a monster on Skyway?" "Not a monster," he said firmly. "Something, I don't know. Something I can't explain." We ended up not reporting it that night. We went inside, locked all the doors, something we rarely do out here, and tried to process what we'd seen. Robert made us both strong drinks, and we sat at the kitchen table going over every detail we could remember. The height, definitely over 6 feet. The hair, short, black, covering its entire body. The white spots or specks, the peaked head with the small cranium, the massive build, especially the thick legs, how it didn't make a sound when it moved, how its eyes didn't reflect light. The more we talked, the more certain we became that we hadn't seen a bear, a deer, a mountain lion, or any other known animal from these parts. And it definitely wasn't a person in a costume, not out there, not at that hour, and not moving the way it did. I barely slept that night. Every creak of our house, every sound from the forest outside had me on edge. I kept picturing that thing standing outside our bedroom window, looking in with those dark, light-absorbing eyes. The next morning, Robert called a friend who works for the Forest Service. He tried to be casual about it, asking if there had been any unusual animal sightings in our area recently. His friend mentioned some bear activity near Concow, but nothing out of the ordinary. Robert didn't tell him what we'd seen. I think he was afraid of sounding crazy. Over the next few days, I found myself researching local wildlife obsessively. I looked up every large mammal native to Northern California. None matched what we'd seen. Then, almost inevitably, I started reading about Bigfoot sightings. I've never been someone who believed in cryptids or monsters. I always figured those stories were misidentifications or hoaxes, but the descriptions I found, the height, the build, the way they move, it was uncanny how similar they were to what we'd witnessed. There have been reported sightings in Butte County before. Most people around here dismiss them as nonsense, but now I'm not so sure. The Sierras are vast, and there are parts of these forests that rarely see human traffic. A week after our encounter, Robert and I drove back to that same stretch of road during daylight. We were hoping to find, I don't know, tracks maybe? Some evidence of what we'd seen. But there was nothing. Just the same winding road through the same dense forest that we've driven hundreds of times before. We did notice how remote that particular section is. There are no houses nearby, no turnoffs, just unbroken forest on both sides. And those canyons I mentioned, some are incredibly deep and rugged. Perfect hiding places if something wanted to remain hidden. I found myself avoiding driving that road at night now. Robert too, though he won't admit it. We take the long way around if we need to visit his brother after dark. Sometimes I catch Robert staring into the trees at the edge of our property with a worried look. When I ask what's wrong, he just shakes his head and says, "Nothing." But I know he's thinking about it too. Wondering if that thing is out there, moving silently through the forest. Wondering if it lives nearby. Wondering if it's watching us. The worst part is not knowing. Not knowing what we saw, not knowing if we're in danger, not knowing if anyone would believe us if we told the full story. I wake up sometimes at 3 a.m., convinced I've heard something moving outside our house. Robert installed motion-activated lights all around the property last month. He said it was for security, but I know the real reason. I've become hyper-aware of how isolated our house is. We're at the end of a long driveway, backed up against forest land. Before I loved that privacy. Now it makes me uneasy. What else might be out there that we don't know about? I've tried to rationalize what we saw. Maybe it was just a bear with some kind of mange or disease that made its fur look strange. Maybe the white spots were just snow or moonlight playing tricks on our eyes. Maybe its movement only seemed unnatural because we were startled. But then I remember those eyes looking directly at us, the intelligence behind them, the way it seemed to assess us before disappearing. No bear has ever looked at me like that. Last week I heard about another sighting, just outside of Sterling City, not far from where we saw our whatever it was. A logger coming home late said he saw something big moving through the trees beside the road. He described it as man-shaped, but not a man. He didn't get as good a look as we did, but still, it makes me wonder. Are there more people out there who've seen this thing? Are they staying quiet for the same reasons we are? Fear of ridicule, fear of being called crazy. How many sightings go unreported because people don't want to be associated with Bigfoot believers? I'm not saying that's what we saw. I honestly don't know what it was. All I know is that it existed in that moment, standing in our headlights on that dark, lonely stretch of road. It was real, solid, physical, not a shadow or a trick of light. And it moved with purpose, with awareness. Sometimes I think about driving back there at night, bringing a better camera, trying to see it again. Then I remember the fear I felt, the absolute wrongness of what we were seeing, and I come to my senses. Whatever that thing was, I don't want to meet it again. Especially not on purpose, especially not in the dark. 3 nights ago, our motion lights went off at 2:17 a.m. Robert grabbed the flashlight we now keep by the bed and looked out the window. He said it was probably just a deer, but he didn't sound convinced. I lay there, listening for any sound from outside, but there was nothing. Just that same unnatural silence we'd experienced on the road. I don't know if I'll ever have an explanation for what Robert and I saw that night. Maybe it was some unknown species that's managed to remain hidden in these mountains. Maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that the forests around Magalia feel different to me now. When I look into the trees, I can't shake the feeling that something might be looking back, something with dark eyes that don't reflect light, something with a strangely peaked head and a body covered in black hair. And sometimes, when it's very quiet at night, I swear I can hear heavy footsteps moving through the woods behind our house. By the time I get to the window, whatever made them is gone, leaving nothing but questions and that lingering feeling of being watched. Story 11. I've spent 3 days trying to process what happened last Tuesday night, but I still can't wrap my head around it. I keep second-guessing myself, wondering if I was hallucinating or if the lack of sleep was getting to me. But I know what I saw. I know it was real, and I need to get this off my chest. I drive the stretch between Fraser and Winter Park on Highway 40 practically every week. It's a beautiful route through Arapahoe National Forest that I know like the back of my hand. Tuesday night, I was heading back to Winter Park after visiting my buddy in Fraser. It was late, maybe around 11:30 p.m., and the road was completely empty, not unusual for a weeknight in this part of Colorado. I'd had a couple beers at my friend's place, but nothing that would impair my driving or my perception. I want to make that perfectly clear. I was dead sober when this happened. The night was pitch black. No moon, just a blanket of stars above the tree line. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating maybe 30 feet of road ahead. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station, and the heater blasting because it was getting down into the 30s that night. I was cruising along at about 50 mph when I noticed something weird up ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer. We get a lot of them crossing the highway at night, and hitting one can total your car. So I immediately took my foot off the gas. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer at all. This thing was walking right down the middle of my lane, not crossing the road, walking along it in the same direction I was driving. It was massive, way bigger than a person. My first thought was bear, but the shape was all wrong. It was walking upright on two legs with a strange gait that looked, I don't know how to explain it, kind of lumbering but smooth at the same time, almost like it was taking exaggerated steps. I slowed down to maybe 15 mph, keeping a good distance behind it. The thing hadn't reacted to my car at all, which was weird. Even a person would look back if they heard a car approaching. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I got closer, I could make out more details, and that's when it hit me. I was looking at what could only be described as a Sasquatch. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. I've never been the type to buy into that kind of stuff. I'm a practical guy. I work in construction. I deal with concrete facts and measurements all day. But what I was seeing defied any other explanation. It was covered in dark hair. Not black, more of a dark brown or maybe dark reddish brown in my headlights. The hair looked matted in some places, especially around what I assume were its shoulders. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe even 8. Its arms hung down much lower than a human's would, almost to its knees. I didn't know what to do. Should I turn around? Should I try to pass it? I decided to hang back and follow it, partly out of curiosity and partly because I was honestly too shocked to do anything else. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. After following it for maybe a quarter mile, I decided to flick my high beams to see if that would get its attention. When the brighter light hit it, the creature suddenly stopped and turned around. I'll never forget what I saw next. Its face, if you can call it that, was flat with a pronounced brow ridge. The nose was wide and flat, and the mouth seemed to be set in a permanent grimace. But it was the eyes that got me. They were dark, almost black, and deeply set, and they stared directly into my headlights without reflecting light the way a deer's or other animal's eyes would. We locked eyes for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it did something that seemed weirdly human. It raised one of its massive arms and shielded its eyes from my high beams, turning its back to me. But it didn't run away. It just continued walking down the highway like nothing had happened. Like following a Sasquatch down a mountain highway was the most normal thing in the world. I lowered my high beams and continued following it at a crawl. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. I thought about grabbing my phone to record it, but it was in my jacket pocket, and I was honestly afraid to take my hands off the wheel or my eyes off this thing for even a second. After another few hundred yards, it stopped again. Just stood there in the middle of the lane for maybe 30 seconds, not moving. Then it slowly turned its head, not its whole body, just its head, and looked back at me over its shoulder. The movement was so deliberate, so purposeful that it sent chills down my spine. It was like it was checking to see if I was still there. Then it just continued walking. No hurry, no concern, just ambling down the highway like it was out for a casual stroll. I decided to try honking my horn, just a short beep. Nothing. No reaction whatsoever. It didn't even flinch. It was like it either couldn't hear the horn or just didn't care. This bizarre procession continued for what my odometer later told me was nearly a mile. The whole time I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't some guy in a suit. The movements were too fluid, too natural. The proportions were all wrong for a human. And who the hell would be wandering around in a Sasquatch costume on Highway 40 in the middle of the night? At one point I noticed it was kind of weaving a bit, almost like it was wandering aimlessly. It would drift toward the center line, then back toward the shoulder, never in a straight path. I wondered if it was injured or sick or maybe even drunk, if that's possible for a whatever it was. After following it for about 15 minutes at this crawling pace, we came to a section of road with a steep embankment on the right side. Without any warning or hesitation, the creature suddenly veered off the road and slid down the embankment with surprising grace for something so big. It disappeared into the darkness of the forest below. I stopped the car and sat there, my headlights pointing at the spot where it had left the road. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles were white. I was breathing hard, almost hyperventilating. Part of me wanted to get out and look over the embankment, but a stronger part, the survival instinct part, kept me firmly in my seat with the doors locked. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, waiting to see if it would come back up onto the road. It never did. Finally, I put the car in drive and continued on to Winter Park, constantly checking my mirrors and the sides of the road the whole way. I made it home without seeing the creature again, but I couldn't sleep at all that night. I just kept replaying the encounter over and over in my head. The thing that sticks with me the most is how unconcerned it seemed about me or my car. It wasn't afraid. It wasn't aggressive. It was like I was completely insignificant to it. And those eyes, they looked intelligent, aware. There was something behind them that I can't explain. I'm certain it was male, based on its size and the breadth of its shoulders, though I can't be 100% sure. The hair covered most of its body, but it was thinner on its face and hands. And speaking of hands, they were huge, with what looked like opposable thumbs. I've spent the last few days researching Sasquatch sightings in the Arapaho National Forest, and apparently there have been dozens of reports over the years. Some of them describe encounters eerily similar to mine. I drove back to that spot the next day, in broad daylight, looking for tracks or hair or anything that might confirm what I saw. But it had snowed lightly overnight, covering any evidence that might have been there. Part of me was relieved. I'm not sure I wanted confirmation. I still drive that stretch of Highway 40 regularly, but now I do it with a knot in my stomach. I find myself constantly scanning the trees and the road ahead, both hoping and fearing that I'll see it again. I keep my phone ready now, just in case. I haven't told many people about this. How could I? Most would think I'm crazy or making it up. But I know what I saw. It was real. It was right there, illuminated in my headlights, walking down Highway 40 like it owned the place. What bothers me the most is the questions I can't answer. Where was it going? Why was it using the highway instead of moving through the forest? Was it lost, sick, injured, or does it regularly use the road as a path when there's no traffic? And the biggest question, if these creatures exist, how have they remained hidden for so long in an area with so much human activity? The forest is vast, sure, but we're talking about 7 to 8 foot tall bipedal creatures that apparently sometimes take nighttime strolls down public highways. I don't expect answers. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I needed to share this. I needed to put it into words, if only to convince myself that I'm not losing my mind. I'm heading back up to Fraser tonight. Same route, same time. I tell myself it's because I always go on Tuesdays, but the truth is, there's a part of me that hopes I'll see it again. A part of me that needs confirmation that what I experienced was real, and not some weird hallucination or waking dream. I've got my dashcam set up now. It's always running, just in case. But even if I never see it again, even if I never get proof, I know what happened that night on Highway 40. I know what I saw walking in my headlights, shielding its eyes from the high beams and sliding down that embankment into the darkness. And I'll never drive through Arapahoe National Forest at night the same way again. Story 12. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened last month at our family hunting cabin. My brother Noah and I have been going up to Elk County since we were kids, but nothing prepared us for what we experienced that night. For context, our family has owned this small cabin in the Pennsylvania woods for generations. My dad William took me there as soon as I could walk, and he did the same with Noah. We've spent countless weekends tracking deer, setting up duck blinds, and just enjoying the isolation. Between my dad, Uncle Robert, Noah, and me, we've got over 70 years of combined experience in these woods, or at least we thought we knew these woods. It was mid-October, prime time for our annual fall hunting trip. Noah drove up with me from Pittsburgh that Friday afternoon. Dad and Uncle Robert had arrived the day before to get the cabin ready, checking the generator, stocking wood for the fireplace, and making sure nothing had gotten in during the summer months. The cabin itself isn't much: 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living area with a stone fireplace. It's about 1.5 miles down an old logging road, and the nearest neighbor is probably 3 miles away as the crow flies. We got there around 4 p.m., unloaded our gear, and spent the evening catching up. After dinner, the 4 of us decided to sit around the fire pit outside. Dad had built a small campfire, and we were just relaxing, drinking a few beers, and talking about our plans for the weekend hunt. Nothing unusual about any of it. We'd done this ritual 100 times before. The night was cool, but not cold, maybe low 50s, with a slight breeze rustling the trees. No moon, but the stars were out in full force. You never see stars like that in the city. The only light besides the fire came from the single floodlight mounted on the corner of the cabin that illuminated part of the yard and the edge of the tree line. It was about 10 p.m. when it happened. Noah was in the middle of telling a story about some customer at his hardware store when we heard it. At first, I thought it was a bear. We get black bears in these woods, and they sometimes come around the cabins looking for food. But I've heard bear sounds before, and this wasn't a bear. The sound came from the woods beyond the floodlight's reach, maybe 30 yards away. It started as this deep, guttural growl that quickly morphed into something else, a scream, but not a human scream. I don't know how to describe it except that it was loud, unnaturally loud, like it was designed to travel for miles. It had this weird quality that seemed to vibrate in my chest, resonating through my body in a way that made my skin prickle all over. Noah stopped mid-sentence. I remember his expression perfectly. His eyes went wide, and he slowly turned his head toward the sound. Dad, who was sitting across from me, froze with his beer halfway to his mouth. Uncle Robert was the first to speak. What the hell was that? He whispered it like he was afraid of being heard. We didn't have to wait for an answer because the sound came again, louder this time. It was like nothing I'd ever heard in these woods. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, not a coyote, not anything I could identify. It was almost structured, like it had patterns to it, rising and falling in pitch, starting low, then climbing to this blood-curdling peak before dropping back down. Then we heard the breaking. Whatever was out there was snapping branches, not small twigs but substantial limbs. You could hear the wood splintering, cracking, and then the heavy thud as pieces hit the ground. This wasn't an animal casually moving through the forest. It was violent, deliberate destruction. Inside, now... Dad's voice was dead serious, and none of us argued. We scrambled to our feet, leaving the fire burning, and hurried to the cabin. Noah was closest to the door, and he practically fell through it in his rush. I was right behind him, with Dad and Uncle Robert following. Once inside, Dad immediately grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. Uncle Robert went to the window that faced the direction of the sounds. I remember the way his face looked in the dim light of the cabin. I'd never seen my uncle scared before. He's a former Army Ranger, tough as nails. But right then, he looked genuinely unsettled. "Bill," he said to my dad, "you ever heard anything like that before?" Dad shook his head. "No, not in 40 years of hunting these woods." The sounds continued for maybe 30 seconds total, that screaming and the breaking of branches. Then it stopped. The sudden silence was almost as unsettling as the noise had been. We stood there, barely breathing, listening. "Maybe it's gone," Noah whispered after a minute had passed without any noise. Dad motioned for us to stay quiet and moved toward the front door. He flipped on the porch light and slowly opened the door, rifle ready. I followed him and we stood on the porch, scanning the area. The fire was still burning in the pit, casting flickering light across the yard, but everything beyond was darkness. Then we heard it, a deep, rhythmic sound from just beyond where the floodlight reached. It was like breathing or grunting, slow and methodical. We couldn't see anything, but whatever it was still there, just waiting in the darkness. "It's watching us," I said, the words barely audible. Dad nodded. "Inside," he mouthed, and we backed slowly into the cabin, closing and locking the door behind us. For the next hour we sat in the living room, all lights off except for a small lamp, weapons ready. Dad had his rifle, Uncle Robert had his shotgun, and Noah and I each had our hunting knives. We spoke in whispers, trying to rationalize what we'd heard. "Maybe it's a bear that's sick or injured," Noah suggested. Uncle Robert shook his head. "Bears don't make sounds like that, and they don't break trees like they're toothpicks." "Could be kids messing around," I offered, though I didn't believe it myself. We were too far from anywhere for it to be pranksters. Dad just sat there, unusually quiet. Finally he said, "I've never heard anything like that in my life, and I've heard just about everything these woods have to offer." Around 11:30 we decided to take shifts watching while the others tried to sleep. Uncle Robert took the first watch, and the rest of us went to the bedrooms, though I don't think any of us actually slept. I just lay there, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin, wondering what was out there. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, Noah was shaking me awake. The clock read 3:27 a.m. "It's back," he whispered. "Listen." I sat up and held my breath. At first I didn't hear anything. Then it came again, that same scream from earlier, but farther away this time, maybe a few 100 yards from the cabin. It was still loud enough to make my heart race. We went into the living room, where Dad and Uncle Robert were already at the windows. "It's been doing that for about 5 minutes," Uncle Robert said, "moving around out there." The sounds continued on and off for maybe 20 minutes. Sometimes it seemed closer, sometimes farther away, but always that same horrible screaming, followed by the sounds of destruction, breaking wood, crashing through the underbrush. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. None of us slept. When dawn finally broke, we were all exhausted and on edge, but determined to figure out what had happened. After a quick breakfast and several cups of strong coffee, Dad suggested we check out the area where we'd heard the sounds. We armed ourselves, Dad and Uncle Robert with rifles, Noah with the shotgun, and me with Dad's old .357 revolver, and headed out. The morning was crisp and bright, the kind of perfect fall day that normally would have put us in good spirits for hunting. But there was nothing normal about how we felt as we cautiously moved toward the tree line where the sounds had originated. The first thing we noticed was the campfire. It had burned out naturally, and nothing seemed disturbed around it. But as we approached the edge of the woods, we saw the damage. About 30 yards in, there was a section where several saplings had been broken, not cut, not chewed by beavers, but snapped about 4 feet up from the ground. Some were 3 or 4 inches thick. Whatever had done this had significant strength. "Look at this," Uncle Robert called from a few feet away. He was pointing at the ground. We gathered around and saw what appeared to be a depression in the forest floor, like something heavy had stood there. It wasn't exactly a footprint. The ground was too covered with leaves and pine needles to hold a clear impression, but something had definitely compressed the soil. "How big would you say that is?" Noah asked, his voice unnaturally high. Dad knelt down and placed his hand next to the depression for scale. His hand looked tiny in comparison. "Big," was all he said. We tried to follow the direction of the disturbance, but the underbrush quickly became too thick. This part of the woods hadn't been logged or maintained in decades, and it was a tangled mess of briars, fallen trees, and dense vegetation. Whatever had made those sounds had managed to move through this without much trouble, but for us, it was nearly impassable. After struggling for about 100 yards, Dad called it off. "We're making too much noise," he said, "and we're not equipped for this kind of tracking." The unspoken part was clear. None of us was particularly eager to actually find what we were tracking. Back at the cabin, we had a serious discussion about what to do next. Uncle Robert wanted to pack up and leave immediately. Noah agreed with him. I was torn. Part of me wanted to get the hell out of there, but another part was intensely curious about what we'd encountered. Dad was the deciding vote. "We came here to hunt," he said firmly, "and that's what we're going to do. But we stay together, no one goes off alone, and we're all back at the cabin before dark." So that's what we did. We spent the day hunting as planned, though our hearts weren't really in it. We were jumpy, constantly scanning the woods around us, and talking more than we normally would while hunting. Needless to say, we didn't get anything that day. As the afternoon wore on, and the shadows started to lengthen, we headed back to the cabin. No one wanted to be outside after dark. We got back around 5 p.m., secured everything, and spent the evening inside with the curtains drawn and the lights low. We took turns keeping watch again that night, but whatever had been out there didn't return. At least, not that we could hear. Sunday morning, we packed up earlier than planned and headed home. The drive back was mostly silent. I think we were all trying to process what had happened, trying to fit it into our understanding of the world. It's been 3 weeks now, and I still don't have any explanation for what we experienced. I've researched strange animal sounds, looked into local legends, even reached out to a wildlife biologist from Penn State. Nothing matches what we heard. Dad called last week and said he's not planning to go back to the cabin until spring. This from a man who's never missed a November deer season in his life. Uncle Robert flat out says he's never going back there. Noah and I have talked about it a lot. We keep circling back to the same conclusion. Whatever was out there that night wasn't something normal. It wasn't a known animal. It wasn't kids playing pranks. It wasn't the wind or our imaginations. It was something else, something that doesn't fit neatly into the world as we understand it. I can't shake the feeling that it was sending us a message that night, the way it stayed just beyond the light, the way it made those horrifying sounds, the destruction it caused. It felt deliberate, like a warning, like it was telling us we were in its territory and it wanted us gone. I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't believe in monsters or the supernatural, but I also trust my senses and my experience. And what I experienced that night in the Pennsylvania woods was real. It happened. 4 grown men with decades of outdoor experience between them all witnessed the same thing. Whatever it was, it's still out there, and I'm not sure I ever want to find out what it is. Story 13. I've been trying to process what happened for over a year now, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm not someone who believes in the paranormal or cryptids or whatever. I'm just a regular guy who loves hunting, fishing, and spending time outdoors. I've been hunting since I was 12, so I know what animals look like and how they behave. What I saw that weekend in October 2021 was unlike anything I've ever experienced, and I need to get this off my chest. My girlfriend Leah and I headed up to my family's cabin in Harrison Valley, Pennsylvania for a long weekend. It's a place I've been going to since I was a kid. My grandpa built the cabin himself back in the 70s, and it's been passed down through the family. It sits on about 40 acres with a big pond surrounded by state game lands. Perfect for hunting, totally secluded, and usually peaceful as hell. We arrived Friday evening around 5 p.m. It was getting dark early since it was mid-October, and there was this weird vibe right from the start. The drive up was normal enough. We stopped for snacks, talked about work stuff, normal couple things. Leah was excited because it was her first time at the cabin. I was just happy to have a few days away from the grind. After unloading the truck and getting the generator going, I decided to spotlight the field for deer. It's something I always do. Partly to see what's around, and partly because it's just cool to see their eyes shine in the darkness. I grabbed my high-powered flashlight and we walked to the edge of the yard. The field was empty at first, which was unusual. Normally there'd be at least a few deer grazing. I swept the light across the tree line, and that's when I saw them. 2 red eyes reflecting in the darkness at the edge of the property. They were higher off the ground than deer eyes would be, maybe 6 or 7 feet up. My first thought was, what the hell is that tall and has red eye shine? I've seen plenty of animals in those woods, deer, coyotes, bears, raccoons, but nothing with eyes that high off the ground and that particular reddish glow. I pointed it out to Leah, but by the time she looked, whatever it was had moved back into the trees. I tried to play it cool and said it was probably just a deer, but deep down I knew better. Deer eyes shine greenish blue, not red, and they're never that high off the ground. We went back inside and made dinner, but I kept looking out the windows, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around 9 p.m. we were sitting on the couch watching a movie on my laptop when I heard it. Branches snapping outside, and not in the way that happens when a deer or small animal moves through the woods. These were loud cracks, like something heavy was moving just beyond the yard. "Did you hear that?" I asked Leah. She nodded, looking nervous. "Is it a bear?" "Maybe," I said, but bears usually make other noises too, huffing, rustling through leaves. This was just the deliberate snap of thick branches. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun, just in case, and went to the window, swept the beam across the yard but saw nothing. The snapping had stopped as soon as I turned on the light. Whatever was out there knew we were inside and was watching us. We tried to go back to the movie, but the mood was shot. Around midnight we went to bed. I'd brought earplugs for Leah, since she's not used to how loud nature can be at night, but I never wear them. I like to hear what's going on around me. All night I lay there listening to more branch breaks, some so close to the cabin I could swear they were on the porch. There was also this weird feeling of pressure, like when you know someone's staring at you, even though you can't see them. Saturday morning seemed normal at first. We made breakfast and decided to hike around the property. The pond was low from lack of rain, and everything looked like it usually does in fall. Orange and red leaves, the smell of decay in the woods, that crisp October air. But there weren't many animal sounds. No squirrels chattering, fewer birds than normal, just quiet. We hiked to the back of the property where there's a ridge overlooking a valley. Usually you can spot deer down below, but there was nothing. On the way back, I noticed broken branches about 7 to 8 feet high on some of the trees, not cut, but snapped like something tall had pushed through. "That's weird," I said, pointing them out to Leah. "Maybe a storm did it," she suggested. But there hadn't been any big storms recently, and the breaks were all at the same height, forming almost a path through the trees. That evening, things got stranger. We were grilling burgers outside when we heard coyotes start howling. Now, I've heard coyotes my whole life. Usually it's just a few, and they don't come close to human dwellings. But this was different. It sounded like a huge pack, maybe 15-20 of them, and they were circling the entire property, yipping and howling like they were communicating, and they sounded agitated, almost panicked. Leah was getting nervous. "Is that normal?" "No," I admitted. "Never heard that many together." The coyotes kept it up for about an hour, then suddenly went silent all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence was almost worse than the howling. That night, the branch breaking was closer and more frequent. I got up twice to check, but again, nothing visible in the flashlight beam. Just the sense that something was watching the cabin, studying us. On Sunday, Leah was clearly uneasy. She suggested we leave early, but I convinced her to stay. I told her it was just local wildlife, nothing to worry about. But I was curious myself now. I wanted to figure out what was going on. We spent most of Sunday inside because it was raining. The feeling of being watched never left. Every time I looked out the windows, I expected to see something staring back. Sunday night was the worst for sounds. Not just branch breaks anymore, but heavy footsteps circling the cabin. At one point, something large bumped against the back wall, making the whole cabin shudder. Leah was scared enough that we pushed the couch against the door before going to bed. "If it's a bear, it'll lose interest by morning," I assured her, but I wasn't so certain myself anymore. Bears don't stalk a place for days. They make noise, they try to get to food, and they leave. This was different, more deliberate, more intelligent. Monday morning, our last day, I woke up early, around 5:30 a.m. Leah was still asleep. I made coffee and looked out the front window. That's when I saw 3 deer at the edge of the yard. They were acting strange, heads up, ears twitching, totally alert. Usually deer are calm in the morning, grazing peacefully. These looked ready to bolt at any second. I grabbed my rifle with the scope, just to get a better look at what might be spooking them. I scanned the tree line where they were staring. At first I thought I was looking at a dark tree stump, or maybe a bear. There was definitely something there. A dark figure partially hidden behind a thick oak. I adjusted the scope and felt my blood run cold. It wasn't a bear. It was standing upright, but not like a bear does occasionally. This thing was fully vertical, with a posture almost like a human, but wrong somehow. Its shoulders were hunched forward, and its arms were tucked in front of its body, like it was trying to make itself look like a tree stump. But what really got me was the head, oval-shaped, almost human-like, but larger, and it was slowly, methodically scanning the area, moving its head from side to side in this deliberate way. I steadied my breathing and focused the scope better. The creature was covered in hair, not fur like a bear, but hair maybe 4 inches long, dense and dark brown. It had to be 7 to 8 feet tall at minimum. I could make out what looked like eye sockets, deeply set and dark, and what seemed to be a narrow, flat nose. Its face was partially obscured by shorter hair, but the features I could see were undeniably hominid. My hands were shaking so bad I had to set the rifle down for a second. I took a few deep breaths, picked it back up and looked again. The thing was still there, still doing that weird scan of the area. I was trying to process what I was seeing when I heard it. 4 distinct whistles from the back of the property. Not bird whistles. These were deliberate, patterned, almost like signals. The creature in my scope immediately turned its head toward the sound. Then, with a fluidity that was terrifying for something so large, it moved behind the tree and out of my sight. I swung my scope to where the whistles had come from and caught movement in the bushes. There was a second one, moving through the underbrush about 200 yards away. I only got glimpses, an arm here, the top of a head there, but it was the same type of creature. I watched for nearly 30 minutes as they moved around the perimeter of the property, always staying just within the tree line, never fully exposing themselves. They seemed to be communicating somehow. When one would move, the other would stop, like they were coordinating. Leah woke up and came into the living room. "What are you looking at?" she asked, yawning. I couldn't tell her. She'd think I was crazy, or worse, she'd look and actually see them, and then we'd both have to deal with knowing these things were real. "Just some deer," I lied, lowering the rifle. "We should pack up. I need to be back in Maryland for work tonight." We packed quickly. I kept glancing out the windows, but the creatures had moved deeper into the woods. Still, that feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. As we loaded the truck, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just silence. Driving away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of them step out onto the dirt road behind us. Leah must have noticed something was off because she kept asking if I was okay. I blamed it on dreading going back to work. It's been over a year, and I haven't told anyone the full story until now. I've been hunting my entire life. I know what bears look like, even standing up. I know what tree stumps look like. I know what other humans in the woods look like. This wasn't any of those things. I've thought about going back with a camera, setting up trail cams around the property. But something stops me every time I plan the trip. Some primal part of my brain that says, they let you leave once, don't push your luck. The property is still in my family. My dad goes up there sometimes, but he's never mentioned anything unusual. Maybe they only show themselves to certain people. Or maybe they're gone now, moved deeper into the forest. But sometimes at night, I still hear those branch breaks in my dreams, and I wake up with that same feeling of being watched, even though I'm 200 miles away in my apartment. Whatever I saw that weekend, I'm convinced they were Sasquatches. Everything fits. The height, the appearance, the behavior. That land has everything they'd need. Water from the pond, plenty of cover, food sources. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm not even sure I would believe it if someone told me this story, but I know what I saw, and I can't explain it. Story 14. I've been sitting on this for 17 years now. Never really told the full story, except to my girlfriend at the time, and a couple close buddies who probably thought I was full of shit anyway. But I need to get this off my chest, because I still think about it almost every damn day. I bought my place in Paulding County, Georgia, back in '96. It's nothing fancy, just a little single-story house on about 5 acres, with a big yard surrounded by a 6-foot chain-link fence. Behind the property, there's thick woods that stretch back maybe half a mile before hitting some swampy areas and creek beds. Beyond that are a couple farms with cattle and horses. It's quiet, private, and exactly what I wanted after working as a bouncer at clubs in Atlanta for too many years. I'm not a small guy, 6'4", 290 pounds, and I've handled my share of drunk idiots who thought they could take on the world. Not much scares me. Plus, I've always had my dogs for company and protection. I've had German Shepherds and Rottweilers over the years, usually 2 at a time. In 2006, I had Rex and Sadie, both Shepherds, trained and protective. June 7th, 2006. That's when everything changed. I remember the date because it was my buddy Mike's birthday, and I'd been out having a few beers with him earlier that evening. Got home around 11, let the dogs out for a bit, then crashed. Nothing unusual. At exactly 1:32 a.m., I remember checking my bedside clock, Rex and Sadie started going absolutely nuts outside, not their normal barking at deer or raccoons. This was aggressive, alarmed barking, the kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up. I figured maybe a coyote had gotten too close to the fence, or possibly someone was on my property. We had occasional issues with local teenagers using the woods as a shortcut, though most knew better than to cut through my yard with the dogs around. I rolled out of bed, pulled on some sweatpants and stepped onto my back porch. The night was clear, nearly full moon, but the tree line was dark. Rex and Sadie were at the back fence, barking toward the woods like their lives depended on it. "Rex, Sadie, quiet down," I yelled, more annoyed than worried at that point. They didn't even look my way. That was weird. My dogs always responded to commands. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, methodical footsteps moving parallel to my fence line, just beyond the tree line, not an animal on 4 legs. This was bipedal, deliberate, slow. "Hey!" I shouted toward the woods. "Private property! Get moving!" The footsteps stopped immediately. Complete silence followed, except for my dogs, who were now growling low instead of barking. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a loud, deep shriek that started low and rose to a pitch that made my skin crawl. It wasn't human, wasn't any animal I've ever heard in these woods either, and I've heard plenty of coyotes, bobcats, you name it. I ran inside, grabbed my Glock and a flashlight. I'm not going to lie, my hands were shaking a bit. I faced down drunk bikers with knives and wasn't this nervous. Back on the porch, I called the dogs to me. They came but stayed right against my legs, which was completely out of character. These dogs would chase anything I pointed at. Not this time. "Last warning!" I yelled into the darkness. "I've got dogs and I'm armed! You're trespassing!" I still thought it might be idiot teenagers or maybe someone casing my place. I fired 3 warning shots into the air, figuring that would scare off whoever or whatever was out there. Big mistake. What came next was a series of howls and shrieks so loud they seemed to vibrate in my chest. And whatever made them wasn't running away. It was moving toward me, just beyond the fence line. I could hear branches breaking, heavy footfalls, faster now. I pointed my flashlight toward the sounds, sweeping the tree line. Nothing reflected back. No eye shine like you'd get from an animal, but I could hear it moving, circling the property just beyond where my light reached. I'm not proud to admit it, but I was scared. Genuinely intimidated for the first time in my adult life. Whatever was out there was big, bigger than me based on how it moved through the brush. And fast. It could cover ground along my fence line in seconds. "Rex, go!" I commanded, trying to send my lead dog to investigate. Rex looked up at me and whined, then tucked his tail and backed up toward the door. I'd never seen him refuse a command, let alone show fear. I retreated to the porch, dogs pressed against me, and kept my flashlight and gun pointed outward. For almost a full hour, this thing shadowed my movements. If I moved to the right side of the porch, it would move along the tree line to stay parallel, always keeping the same distance, always just out of clear sight. Then it started with the knocking. 3 distinct knocks. Wood on wood, it sounded like. 3 knocks, pause. 3 more knocks. The same pattern as my 3 warning shots, like it was mocking me. By now it was close to 3 a.m. The dogs hadn't stopped growling, and I hadn't taken my eyes off the tree line. My back was pressed against my door, one hand on my gun, the other holding the flashlight so tight my fingers were cramping. Around 3:30, the movement and sounds began to fade. The last thing I heard was heavy footsteps moving away deeper into the woods, and what sounded like a tree branch snapping. Not like stepping on a twig, but like something breaking a substantial limb. I didn't sleep. Kept the dogs inside and sat up with all the lights on, gun in my lap until morning. Called in sick to work and waited for daylight. When my girlfriend Lisa arrived around noon, I'd called her first thing in the morning, I finally felt okay going out to investigate. We took the dogs, my gun, and a spotlight that could illuminate half a football field. The dogs were still acting strange, reluctant to go near the back fence. We walked the perimeter inside my property first. Nothing unusual until we reached the far corner where the fence met the deepest part of the woods. That's when I saw it, about 20 yards into the tree line, a flash of movement and what looked like a section of long brown fur between 2 trees. Just for a second, then it was gone, retreating deeper into the woods. Lisa saw it too, grabbed my arm so hard her nails left marks. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. Right by the fence, we found the first piece of evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. A footprint. A single, massive footprint pressed deep into the soft earth where the lawn meets the woods. This thing was maybe 15 inches long. I wear size 14 boots, and my foot didn't come close to filling it. The impression was deep, like whatever made it was extremely heavy. About 10-12 feet up on a nearby tree, there was a broken branch, snapped, not cut, hanging down. Standing on my toes with my arms fully extended, I couldn't reach it. The most disturbing thing was what we found about 5 feet beyond my fence line, a small patch of ground, maybe 3 feet across, where the water was bubbling up black from the soil. The ground around it was undisturbed, but this spot looked like tar bubbling up from below. The smell was awful, like rotting meat mixed with something chemical. I've never smelled anything like it before or since. We ventured a little further into the woods, though every instinct told me to go back to the house. About 50 yards in, we found the first of 7 triangular structures made of sticks and branches. They were about 4 feet tall, 3 sticks leaning together to form a teepee shape, too uniform to be natural, and arranged in what seemed like a line leading deeper into the woods. That's when the dogs, who had finally started acting normal again, suddenly went rigid, hackles up, low growling. I followed their gaze and saw a tree about 5 inches in diameter that had been knocked completely over, not cut, not rotted and fallen, knocked down with the roots partially torn from the ground. Like something had pushed it over with tremendous force. We left immediately. I didn't feel safe out there even in broad daylight. For the next week, I barely slept, kept the dogs inside at night, ordered security cameras that took forever to arrive and install. I heard the knocking a few more times, always in threes, always late at night. Then it just stopped. The weird thing is, I've talked to a few of my neighbors since then. 2 of them admitted they'd heard strange noises at night over the years. One old-timer who lives about a mile down the road told me his grandfather used to call something the night walker that lived in the swamps and would occasionally take livestock. I still live in the same house, haven't had another direct encounter like that night. But sometimes, when I'm out on the porch late and the woods are too quiet, I swear I can feel something watching me from just beyond the tree line. Something that's been there a lot longer than I have. The security cameras have never caught anything conclusive. Just shadows that could be anything. But twice, they've recorded those 3 knocks in the middle of the night. I don't know what was out there that night in June 2006. I don't want to know. But I'm certain of one thing. It knew exactly what I was. And it wanted me to know what it was. Not an animal. Something else. Something that's smart enough to mimic, to intimidate, and to disappear when it wants to. Sometimes I still find those stick structures in the woods. I knock them down whenever I see them, and sometimes they're back up the next day. Story 15. I still get sweaty palms typing this out. It's been 3 months since that morning, and I catch myself listening for sounds outside my cabin almost constantly now. I never believed in this stuff before. Never. I was the guy who'd laugh at those blurry photos and eyewitness accounts on those late-night paranormal shows. But what happened that day in the Daniel Boone National Forest changed everything for me. My wife Sarah and I bought our place about a year ago, a cabin-style house nestled deep in the Kentucky woods. We fell in love with it immediately. The old-growth forest puts on this incredible show every fall. Reds, oranges, yellows that look like something off a postcard. The property's got this great wooden deck that sits about 11 feet off the ground at the back, with stairs going down to this game trail that cuts through the woods behind us. It was perfect. That morning started like any other. I was up early, around 5:30 a.m. Sarah was still asleep, and I decided to enjoy my coffee out on the deck. The air had that crisp fall feel to it, and fog was hanging low between the trees. My buddy Harold was staying with us for the weekend. He'd come down from Cincinnati to do some fishing. I must have dozed off in my chair because I woke up to this strange sound coming from underneath the deck. It sounded like turkeys, that distinctive gobbling noise. Now, this area is prime Kentucky turkey hunting territory, and I'm not going to lie, the thought of fresh wild turkey got me moving. I quietly went inside, grabbed my Browning A5 shotgun, and loaded it with some turkey shot. By the time I got back out, the sounds had moved off the deck area and into the woods near the game trail. I remember thinking it was weird that turkeys would be this close to the house. I sat back down, figuring I'd missed my chance and must have dozed off again. The next thing I know, I'm jolted awake by this loud gobble. Not the normal turkey sound, this was deeper, almost wrong somehow. I'm instantly alert, my heart already speeding up, and I see something moving on the stairs of my deck. My first thought is turkey, but something wasn't adding up. The shape was off. I didn't really think, just reacted. I raised my shotgun and fired quickly. The blast was deafening in the morning quiet. I missed whatever it was, but blew apart a section of my deck railing. The creature, because that's what it was, took off fast. Too fast. Harold came bursting out onto the deck, still in his pajama pants, yelling, "What the hell, Marcus?" What we both saw next is burned into my memory. This thing was moving up the game trail away from us. It wasn't a turkey. It wasn't even close. It was enormous, covered in hair, and moving with this weird gait that was too fluid for something that big. It was tall, I mean crazy tall, like 10 feet at least. The hair looked short over most of its body, but longer around its face, hanging down like a sheepdog's fur. We mostly saw its back as it fled, but that was enough. Harold and I just stood there, completely frozen. I remember my mouth was hanging open, and the shotgun felt suddenly heavy in my hands. After what felt like forever, but was probably just seconds, Harold whispered, "Tell me you saw that too." I nodded, unable to form words. When we finally got our wits about us, we decided to follow the trail. I know that sounds insane, following after something like that, but there's this weird human need to confirm what you've seen when your brain is telling you it's impossible. I reloaded my shotgun, and Harold grabbed the .38 he keeps in his overnight bag. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the shells. We followed the game trail, moving slow, constantly looking around us. The forest felt different suddenly, threatening. Every shadow might be hiding something, watching us. About 20 yards in, we found the first footprint. It was unmistakably a foot, not a paw or hoof, but massive. It measured around 18 inches long when we put Harold's hunting knife next to it for scale. 5 toes on the left footprint, but weirdly only 4 on the right, missing the little toe. The impressions were deep, showing whatever made them was heavy. Harold took pictures on his phone, his hand visibly trembling. We tracked the prints for about a quarter mile. They were spaced far apart. Whatever made them was taking huge strides. The trail led toward this steep, rocky precipice, the kind of spot that would make a perfect ambush location. We both had the same thought at the same time and stopped dead in our tracks. "It could be watching us right now," Harold said, eyes scanning the ridge above. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt exposed, hunted. We decided to back away slowly, never turning our backs to that ridge. We found a spot with decent cover about 100 yards away and just watched. For hours. Neither of us wanted to go back to the cabin without knowing where this thing was. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning fog. By late afternoon, we hadn't seen any movement. No sounds except normal forest noises had returned. Birds were singing again, which seemed like a good sign. Back at the cabin, Sarah was furious we'd been gone all day without telling her where we were. We tried explaining, but the words sounded crazy, even as I said them. Bigfoot isn't something a grown man admits to seeing, not if he wants to be taken seriously. But I know what I saw, what we saw. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. It wasn't a bear. The movement was all wrong, too upright. It wasn't a person in a suit. Nobody could move that fast through rough terrain, and no costume I've ever seen has that natural, fluid motion. The footprints were real. We have the pictures, though they don't show as clearly as I'd like. Since that day, strange things have been happening around our property, weird noises at night. I found odd arrangements of broken branches at the edge of our clearing. Twice, I've discovered our bird feeders completely emptied overnight, crushed and bent like they were toys. I've started keeping the shotgun by the bed. I installed trail cameras last month. Most mornings, they're still working fine, but twice now, I've found them turned around facing trees instead of the clearing. Once, one was simply gone, torn right off the tree, mount and all. Sarah wants to sell the place. I can't blame her. The magic of those beautiful fall colors has been replaced by something else. A constant awareness of the shadows between the trees. Is it still out there, watching us, waiting? I don't hunt turkey anymore. Not after seeing what I saw. Because if it wasn't a Bigfoot out there that morning, then Kentucky's got turkeys that come haired instead of feathered, stand 10 feet tall, and have a particular fondness for birdseed. And somehow, that seems even harder to believe. The locals don't talk much when I bring it up. Most just give me this look, part pity, part something else. But one old-timer at the general store nodded slowly when I mentioned unusual wildlife near my property. "Those woods are old," he told me, "older than any of us, and they keep their secrets close." Then he wouldn't say another word about it. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, certain I've heard that same deep, wrong-sounding gobble from underneath our deck. I lie there in the dark, listening, wondering if tomorrow will be the day it decides to come closer. I don't know what else to say. I know what I saw. I know those footprints were real. And I know something's still out there in the Daniel Boone National Forest, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but it does, and it knows where we live.